The pounding on the cabin door came like death itself, desperate, violent, drowning out even the howling Montana blizzard. Ethan Carver gripped his rifle, knowing no good came calling in weather that could kill a man in minutes. But when he yanked open that door, it wasn't danger that collapsed into his arms. It was a half-frozen woman in a ruined wedding dress, abandoned by the very man who'd sent for her. This is the story of how one cruel rejection became the greatest love the frontier had ever witnessed. Stay with me until the end and comment your city below. I want to know how far this tale of redemption has traveled. The storm had been building for 3 days, and Ethan Carver knew it would be a killer. He'd seen enough Montana winters to recognize the signs. The way the cattle bunched together with their backs to the wind, the eerie green tinge to the northern sky, the bone-deep ache that settled into his old injuries hours before the first snowflake fell. This wasn't just another winter storm. This was the kind of blizzard that wiped entire homesteads off the map, that left frozen corpses to be discovered come spring thaw. Ethan pulled another log from the pile beside his stone fireplace and fed it to the flames. The cabin, solid pine logs chinked tight with mud and moss, creaked under the wind's assault but held firm. He'd built it himself 5 years ago, after Sarah died, needing something to occupy his hands and quiet his mind. Every beam, every joint, every carefully fitted stone in the chimney had been placed with the methodical precision of a man trying to outwork his grief. "Just you and me tonight, old friend," he murmured to his dog, Blue, a grizzled cattle dog who'd seen better days. Blue's tail thumped once against the floor, but his eyes remained fixed on the door, ears pricked forward. Ethan followed the dog's gaze. "Nothing out there but death tonight, boy. Nothing foolish enough to be moving in this." He returned to his work, mending a broken bridle by lamplight. His hands, scarred and capable, moved with practiced ease despite the shadows dancing across the leather. The work was meditative, each stitch precise and strong. Sarah had always said he had gentle hands for such a rough man. The memory brought its familiar ache, dulled now by time, but never fully gone. The wind screamed louder, rattling the shutters he'd barred tight that afternoon. Snow had already drifted halfway up the windows, turning the glass into walls of white. By morning, he'd likely have to dig his way out. But he had enough firewood stacked inside, enough salted beef and preserved vegetables in the root cellar, enough coffee and whiskey to wait out even a week-long blow if necessary. Blue suddenly lunged to his feet, a low growl rumbling in his chest. Ethan's hand instinctively moved to the Colt .45 on his hip. "What is it, boy?" The growl deepened. Blue's hackles rose, his body rigid with tension as he faced the door. Then Ethan heard it, barely audible over the storm's fury, a sound that shouldn't exist on a night like this. Knocking. 3 weak taps, then silence, then 3 more, even weaker. "Lord Almighty," Ethan breathed. "No one should be out in this. No one could survive being out in this." He grabbed his Winchester from its place above the mantel, checking that a round was chambered. Claim jumpers wouldn't knock, but desperate men did desperate things, and desperate men in killing weather were the most dangerous kind. "Who's there?" he shouted, though he doubted his voice would carry through the door and howling wind. No answer, just 3 more knocks, so faint he might have imagined them. Blue had stopped growling, his tail now tucked between his legs as he whined, pawing at the door. "Get back," Ethan commanded, and Blue reluctantly retreated to the corner. Ethan lifted the heavy bar securing the door, rifle raised and ready. The moment the bar cleared, the wind grabbed the door, slamming it open with explosive force. Snow and ice burst into the cabin like shrapnel, the temperature dropping 20 degrees in an instant. A figure tumbled forward onto his floor, a shapeless bundle of ice-crusted fabric that might once have been a person. Ethan kicked the door shut, fighting the wind for every inch, and dropped the bar back into place before kneeling beside the still form. "Jesus Christ," he whispered. It was a woman. Her face was deathly pale, lips blue, ice crystals formed on her eyelashes and in her dark hair. But what stopped his heart was what she wore, or what remained of it. A dress that might once have been white silk, now torn and stained, clinging to her frozen form. A wedding dress. Her eyes fluttered open for just a moment, unfocused and glazed with cold. Her lips moved, forming words he couldn't hear. "Don't try to talk," he said, though he doubted she could hear him. She was dying. Another few minutes and she'd be gone. Ethan didn't hesitate. He scooped her into his arms, shocked at how little she weighed, and carried her to the fire. Blue circled anxiously as Ethan laid her on the bearskin rug, as close to the flames as he dared. Her skin was like ice. Her breathing was so shallow he could barely see her chest rise. The wedding dress, frozen stiff, crackled as he tried to examine her for injuries. "Gotta get you warm," he muttered, knowing she was past hearing him. The dress had to come off, modesty be damned when death was minutes away. His knife made quick work of the frozen fabric, cutting away layers of silk and lace, and God knew what else city women wore. Beneath, her undergarments were soaked through and frozen to her skin. Those had to go too. Ethan had seen death enough to know its face, and this woman wore it like a mask. He grabbed every blanket he owned, wrapping her carefully, creating a cocoon of wool and fur. Then, knowing it might not be enough, he did what he'd seen save men during the war. He lay down beside her, pulling her against his chest, sharing what warmth his body could offer. "Come on," he whispered against her hair. "Fight, damn you! You didn't make it this far to die on my floor." Hours passed. The storm raged. Ethan kept the fire blazing, feeding it constantly, holding this stranger whose name he didn't know, whose story he couldn't guess. Sometime near midnight, the violent shivering began. A good sign, though it shook them both like leaves in a gale. He held her tighter, one hand rubbing her back through the blankets, trying to generate more heat. "That's it," he encouraged. "Fight back. Show that cold who's boss." Blue had crept closer, pressing against them, adding his warmth to theirs. The dog's usual suspicion of strangers seemingly overruled by some instinct to help. Near dawn, her eyes opened again. This time they focused, finding his face in the firelight. Fear flashed through them, then confusion. "You're safe," he said quietly. "You're in my cabin." "The storm, she whispered, her voice raw. He left me at the crossroads, said I wasn't what he ordered." The words hit Ethan like cold water. Mail order bride. He'd heard of such arrangements, desperate women from back east answering advertisements from lonely frontier men. But to abandon someone in this weather— "Who?" he asked, though part of him already suspected. "Henry? Henry Callan." The name came out bitter as alkali water. Ethan's jaw tightened. He knew Callan. Everyone in the valley did. Rich rancher, owned the biggest spread for 50 miles. Mean as a rattlesnake and twice as poisonous. Had a reputation for being particular about everything from his horses to his hired hands. "He brought you out here and just left you?" She nodded weakly. "Met me in Billings. Said I wasn't pretty enough, wasn't refined enough for a man of his standing. Had the driver leave me at Parsons Crossroads with my trunk. Said I could walk back to town or freeze, he didn't care which." Parsons Crossroads was 7 miles away, through rough country. In this storm, might as well have been 700. "You walked 7 miles in this weather? In that dress?" "I tried to go back to town. Got turned around, the snow." She shuddered. "I saw your light." "Only light for miles. Lucky you did." Another hour and— He didn't finish, didn't need to. She struggled to sit up, suddenly aware of her state of undress beneath the blankets. Her cheeks flushed despite everything. "Your clothes were frozen. Would have killed you." He stood, turning his back to give her privacy while he found one of his shirts and a pair of pants. "These'll be too big, but they're warm and dry." "Thank you," she whispered. Then, stronger, "I'm Lydia. Lydia Monroe, Ethan Carver." He busied himself with the coffee pot, giving her time to dress. "You hungry? Got some stew from yesterday that's still good." "Starving," she admitted. While he heated the stew, Ethan studied her from the corner of his eye. She was pretty enough, though not in the painted doll way Callan probably expected. Strong features, determined chin, intelligent eyes the color of good coffee. Her hands, he noticed, were calloused. Not a pampered city woman then, despite the fancy dress. "Where you from?" he asked, handing her a bowl of stew. "Philadelphia. Was a seamstress there." She ate carefully despite her hunger, manners intact even after near death. "My father died last year. Consumption. Left debts." The factory where I worked burned down. When I saw Mr. Callan's advertisement, you thought it was a way out. I thought it was a chance at something better. Her laugh was bitter. Foolish. Not foolish. Brave. She looked up at him, surprised. Takes courage to leave everything you know. Come out here to marry a stranger. Takes even more courage to survive what you survived last night. I wouldn't have without you. Well, you did survive. That's what matters. They ate in silence for a while, the storm still raging outside. Blue had decided the woman was acceptable and lay with his head on her feet, tail occasionally wagging. Traitor, Ethan told the dog. You don't warm up to anyone that fast. Animals know things, Lydia said, scratching Blue's ears. They know who to trust. That why you trusted me? Following Blue's lead? She met his eyes steadily. I trusted you because you gave up your own warmth to save a stranger. Because you turned your back to let me dress. Because your eyes are kind even though you're trying to look tough. Ethan felt heat rise in his cheeks and turned to tend the fire. Just did what anyone would do. No, she said quietly. Henry Callan wouldn't have. The driver who left me wouldn't have. You're not like them. I'm nothing special. The man who saved my life doesn't get to decide that. The storm continued for 3 more days. 3 days in which Ethan learned more about Lydia Monroe than he'd learned about anyone since Sarah died. She was 26, older than most mail-order brides. She'd turned down 2 proposals in Philadelphia, holding out for love until poverty made such dreams a luxury she couldn't afford. She could read and write, do figures, and knew Shakespeare well enough to quote him when Ethan mentioned his small collection of books. You read? She asked, surprised, on the second day. Long winters out here. Man's got to do something besides talk to his dog. She'd laughed, the first real laugh he'd heard from her. It transformed her face, made her beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with conventional prettiness. What's your favorite? Don't laugh. I won't. Romeo and Juliet. She didn't laugh. Instead, her eyes softened. A romantic cowboy. Will wonders never cease. My wife. He stopped, the words catching in his throat. You were married. Sarah. 5 years ago. Fever took her. He stared into the fire. She loved that play. Used to read it aloud while I worked. Said even rough men needed poetry in their lives. She was right. She usually was. Lydia didn't push for more, didn't offer empty platitudes. She simply sat with him in the comfortable silence that had developed between them, as natural as breathing. On the 3rd day, while Ethan was tending to the animals in the barn, a treacherous journey of 30 feet that required a rope tied between buildings, Lydia explored the cabin. It was Spartan but clean, everything in its place. The furniture was handmade but skillfully crafted, and on a shelf, next to the books, was a photograph. A woman with gentle eyes and a sweet smile, wearing a simple dress and holding a bouquet of wildflowers. Sarah. When Ethan came back, covered in snow and cursing the cold, he found Lydia cooking. She'd found his stores and was making biscuits, the smell filling the cabin like a warm embrace. Hope you don't mind, she said, suddenly uncertain. I wanted to contribute something. Mind? Woman, I haven't had fresh biscuits in 2 years. She smiled, relieved. My grandmother's recipe. Only thing I'm really good at in the kitchen. That was a lie, he discovered. She was good at everything in the kitchen, making simple ingredients sing in ways he'd never imagined. But more than that, she brought something back to the cabin that had been missing since Sarah. Life. Laughter. Conversation that went beyond the necessary. You must think me pathetic, she said that evening, after they'd finished dinner and were sitting by the fire, him whittling, her mending one of his shirts she'd found that needed attention. Why would I think that? Desperate enough to answer an advertisement. Stupid enough to trust a man I'd never met. Weak enough that he could reject me like damaged goods. Ethan set down his whittling. I think you're one of the strongest women I've met. She laughed, but there was no humor in it. Strong? I nearly died. But you didn't. You kept walking in a blizzard that would have killed most men. You didn't give up. That's not weakness, Lydia. That's steel. Steel doesn't cry itself to sleep. He'd heard her, of course, trying to muffle her sobs in the night. Had wanted to comfort her but didn't know how, didn't trust himself to maintain appropriate boundaries with this woman who was awakening things in him he'd thought died with Sarah. "Steel can cry," he said softly. "Doesn't make it less strong." She looked at him for a long moment, something shifting in her expression. "You're not what I expected from a frontier man." "What did you expect?" "Rough, crude, like Henry Callan." "Callan's not a man. He's a snake in man's clothing." "You know him well?" "Well enough. Tried to buy my land last year. Didn't like being told no." "What did he do?" "Tried various forms of persuasion. Dead cattle, damaged fences, veiled threats." "But you stayed." "This is my home. Sarah's buried on the hill out back. I'm not leaving." Lydia nodded, understanding in her eyes. "Home's worth fighting for." "Yes, it is." The fourth morning dawned clear and bright, the storm finally blown out. Ethan opened the door to find drifts up to his chest, the world transformed into an alien landscape of pristine white. "It's beautiful," Lydia breathed, standing beside him. "Beautiful and deadly. Like most things out here." "When can I leave?" The question hit him unexpectedly hard. Of course she'd leave. She had no reason to stay, no connection to this place beyond survival. Roads won't be clear for days, maybe a week. Even then, traveling alone. "I can't impose on you that long." "You're not imposing." "Ethan, I mean it. You're welcome here as long as you need." She studied his face. "People will talk. A single woman staying with a single man." "Let them talk." "It could damage your reputation." He laughed, surprising them both. "My reputation?" "Lydia, I'm a hermit who barely goes to town twice a year. What reputation?" "And mine?" "Anyone says a word against a woman who survived what you survived, they'll answer to me." The fierceness in his voice made her step back. "You don't owe me anything." "This isn't about owing." "Then what's it about?" He didn't answer because he didn't know. Or maybe he did know and wasn't ready to admit it. That something about this woman had hooked into him, deep and true. That the cabin felt less empty with her in it. That for the first time in 5 years, he was dreading being alone again. "It's about doing what's right," he finally said. She nodded, accepting the half-truth. That afternoon, while Ethan dug paths to the barn and, well, Lydia found his sewing supplies and began altering his spare clothes to fit her better. She was good with a needle, professional even, and soon had fashioned reasonable outfits from his rough garments. "You really were a seamstress," he said, admiring her work. "Best in my shop. Could make a ball gown from scraps," my supervisor said. "Ever make anything for yourself? Something fancy?" Her face clouded. "Once, for the church social, took me 3 months, working evenings, lavender silk with pearl buttons. Thomas Morrison said I looked like a princess." She laughed bitterly. Thomas Morrison, who then married Margaret Baker in her father's shipping business. His loss. "That's kind of you to say." "It's the truth." That evening, they sat closer on the bench before the fire. Not touching, but close enough that he could smell the soap she'd used, feel the warmth radiating from her. "Tell me about Sarah," she said suddenly. "Why?" "Because you loved her. Because she's part of this place. Because I'd like to know her." So he talked. Told her about meeting Sarah at a barn raising, how she'd laughed when he'd gotten tongue-tied asking her to dance, how they'd married within 6 months, built this cabin together, planned a future that never came. "She would have liked you," he said finally. "You think so?" "You're strong like she was, gentle but tough, and you don't let me get away with brooding." "Do you brood often?" "Blue says constantly." She smiled. "Blue talks." "All the time. Mostly complaints about the food and requests for belly rubs." She laughed, and he realized he was trying to make her laugh, wanted to see her face light up like that as often as possible. "Ethan," she started, then stopped. "What?" "Nothing." "It's nothing." But it wasn't nothing. Something was building between them, electric and undeniable. Every accidental touch sent sparks through him. Every shared glance lasted a heartbeat too long. The cabin, spacious enough for one, felt impossibly small with two. On the fifth night, she woke screaming. Ethan was beside her in an instant, gathering her shaking form against him. Just a dream. You're safe. You're safe. The snow, she gasped. I was back in the snow. Couldn't find the light. Couldn't find... I'm here. You found me. You're safe. She clung to him, face buried against his chest, and he held her, whispering comfort until the shaking stopped. Don't leave, she whispered. I won't. He stayed, holding her through the night, her head on his shoulder, her breath warm against his neck. It was torture and heaven combined, this closeness that meant everything and nothing. When morning came, she pulled away, embarrassed. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have. Don't apologize. But, Lydia, don't. She looked at him, something desperate in her eyes. This is dangerous. I know. I can't stay here. I know. But I don't want to leave. The admission hung between them, heavy with possibility and impossibility in equal measure. A knock at the door shattered the moment. Ethan grabbed his rifle, motioning for Lydia to stay back. No one should be able to get through the snow yet. No one except Carver. Open up. Sheriff's business. Sheriff Tom Bradley's voice. Ethan lowered the rifle and opened the door. Bradley stood there with two other men, all on horseback, their mounts steaming in the cold air. Ethan, glad to find you alive. Tom, what brings you out in this? Looking for someone. Woman went missing in the storm. Mail-order bride belonging to Henry Callan. Ethan felt Lydia stiffen behind him. Belonging to? You know what I mean. She arrived here? A woman found my cabin in the storm, yes. Thank God. Bradley's relief was genuine. He was a good man, fair and honest. Callan's been beside himself. Thought she was dead for sure. Beside himself? Lydia stepped forward, and Ethan saw Bradley's eyes widen at her appearance in men's clothes. He left me to die. Now, miss, I'm sure there was a misunderstanding. No misunderstanding, Sheriff. He took one look at me in Billings, said I wasn't suitable, and had his driver abandon me at Parsons Crossroads in a blizzard. Bradley frowned. Callan said you ran off, said you took one look at the ranch and decided frontier life wasn't for you. He's lying. That's a serious accusation, miss. It's the truth. Bradley looked between them, clearly uncomfortable. Well, either way, Mr. Callan's waiting in town. He wants to discuss the situation. There's nothing to discuss, Lydia said firmly. He broke our agreement. Maybe so, but he paid for your passage out here. There are legal considerations. Legal? Ethan's voice was dangerous. Tom, the man left her to die. We only have her word on that. You calling her a liar? I'm saying it's complicated. Look, why don't you both come to town, sort this out proper-like? Ethan looked at Lydia. Her face was pale, but determined. We'll come, she said. I want everyone to hear what Henry Callan did. The ride to town was slow, the horses struggling through the deep snow. Lydia rode behind Ethan on his horse, her arms around his waist, and he was acutely aware of every point of contact. Whatever happens, he said quietly, you don't have to go with him. I might not have a choice. There's always a choice. For men, maybe. Women's choices are more limited. Not while I'm around. She tightened her arms around him. You can't fight my battles, Ethan. Watch me. The town was bustling despite the snow, everyone eager to get out after being trapped by the storm. Word spread quickly about their arrival, and by the time they reached the sheriff's office, a crowd had gathered. Henry Callan was waiting inside, dressed in his finest suit, looking every inch the prosperous rancher. He was a handsome man in a cold way with pale eyes and a cruel mouth. Lydia, he said smoothly, thank God you're safe. I've been worried sick. Have you? Her voice could have frozen flame. When you ran off in the storm, I feared the worst. I didn't run off. You abandoned me. Callan's expression was all wounded innocence. My dear, I know you were overwhelmed by the sudden change, but to make such accusations... Stop. Lydia pulled a paper from her pocket. She'd had the foresight to keep it safe. Your own hand, Mr. Callan. Your note releasing me from our agreement, Callan's face darkened as she showed the paper to the sheriff. In his haste and cruelty, he'd actually written it down. Miss Monroe is hereby released from all obligations, being unsuitable for my requirements. That doesn't prove. Your driver's name is Pete Hutchins, Lydia continued. He has a scar on his left cheek and a missing tooth. He wore a blue coat with brass buttons. He said, and I quote, "Mr. Callan says you can walk to town or freeze, makes no difference to him." Would you like me to continue? The crowd murmured. Everyone knew Pete Hutchins, knew he worked for Callan. Even if that's true, Callan said, recovering his composure, I paid significant money for her passage. I'm entitled to compensation. You're entitled to nothing, Ethan said. Callan's eyes fixed on him. This doesn't concern you, Carver. It does now. Oh. Callan's smile was nasty. Playing hero to the damsel in distress? How noble. Though I wonder what people will say about her staying in your cabin. Alone. For a week. The crowd's murmur grew louder. Ethan felt Lydia tense beside him. They'll say I saved her life, Ethan said evenly. Will they? Or will they say she's a woman of loose morals who ran from one man's bed to another's? Ethan moved so fast Callan didn't have time to react. One moment he was smirking, the next he was on the floor with Ethan's fist connecting with his jaw. Ethan! Bradley grabbed him, pulling him back. That's enough! Callan wiped blood from his mouth, his eyes murderous. You'll pay for that, Carver. Send me the bill. This isn't over. She owes me. She owes you nothing. A new voice entered the conversation. Reverend Mills, the town's minister, pushed through the crowd. I've heard enough. Mr. Callan, you entered into an agreement with this woman and then broke it, abandoned her in life-threatening conditions. Any debt is more than paid by her suffering. You don't have the authority. No, but I have a voice, and so does everyone here. Mills looked around the crowd. What say you all? Should this woman be forced to honor an agreement with a man who left her to die? The crowd's response was immediate and negative. Whatever they might think of the propriety of Lydia staying with Ethan, abandoning a woman in a blizzard crossed a line even frontier justice couldn't ignore. Callan stood, straightening his jacket. This isn't over, he said again. But the threat was hollow now. He'd lost the crowd, lost his moral high ground. After he left, Bradley sighed. You've made an enemy there, Ethan. Already had one. And you, miss. Bradley turned to Lydia. You'll need somewhere to stay. Mrs. Patterson runs a boarding house. She'll stay with me, Ethan said. The crowd went silent. Ethan, Bradley said carefully, that's not proper. Then I'll make it proper. He turned to Lydia, his heart hammering. Marry me. The silence was deafening. Lydia stared at him, mouth open. You don't have to, he said quickly, but it would solve problems. Keep you safe from Callan. Stop the gossip. That's why you're asking? For propriety? No. The word came out rough, honest. That's the excuse. The reason is I don't want you to leave. Ethan, I know it's sudden. I know you have no reason to trust another man's proposal, but I'm not Callan. I'm not offering a business arrangement. I'm offering... He stopped, swallowed. I'm offering everything I have. It's not much, but it's yours if you want it. Lydia looked at him for a long moment. The crowd held its breath. You saved my life, she said softly. That's not a reason to marry me. No, it's not. She stepped closer. But the way you held me through my nightmares might be. The way you gave me your own clothes, turned your back while I dressed. The way you talk to Blue when you think I'm not listening. The way you look at me like I'm not damaged goods. You're not. The way you make me feel safe, wanted, like maybe I could have a home here. Her voice dropped to a whisper. Like maybe what I found in that storm was what I was really looking for all along. Is that a yes? Ask me properly. He dropped to one knee right there in the sheriff's office, in front of half the town. Lydia Monroe, will you marry me? Yes. The crowd erupted. Some cheered, some gossiped, but Ethan heard none of it. He was too busy kissing his bride-to-be, propriety be damned. They married 3 days later in a simple ceremony in the town's small church. Lydia wore a dress borrowed from Mrs. Mills, the Reverend's wife, and carried wildflowers Ethan had somehow found beneath the snow. The ceremony was small, just the Reverend, his wife, Sheriff Bradley as witness, and surprisingly old Mrs. Watson, the town's matriarch, who decided to give her blessing to the match. Any woman tough enough to survive that storm and stand up to Henry Callan is good enough for this town, she'd declared, and that was that. As they exchanged vows, Ethan thought he saw Sarah in the chapel's shadows, smiling, approving, letting him go. "You may kiss the bride," Reverend Mills said, and Ethan did, soft and sweet and full of promise. They returned to the cabin as husband and wife, Blue running circles around them in canine celebration. "Are you sure?" Lydia asked as Ethan carried her over the threshold. "We barely know each other." "I know enough." "What if you regret it? What if I don't?" That night, as they lay together for the first time as man and wife, Lydia traced the scars on his chest. "Tell me about these." "War wounds mostly. This one's from a Union soldier at Antietam. This one's from a horse that disagreed with being broken." "And this one?" She touched a thin scar near his heart. "That one's from trying to live without living. From existing instead of being truly alive. And now? Now I have you." She kissed him then, and talking became unnecessary. Later, as moonlight streamed through the window and Lydia slept in his arms, Ethan whispered a thank you to the storm that had brought her to his door. Sometimes the worst moments led to the best outcomes. Sometimes what seemed like an ending was really a beginning. Outside, snow began to fall again, but inside the cabin, two people who'd been broken by loss had found wholeness in each other. The frontier was harsh, unforgiving, brutal in its indifference. But it was also a place where love could bloom in the most unexpected circumstances, where strangers could become soulmates in the space of a storm, where a knock on a door could change everything. As sleep finally took him, Ethan's last thought was of Sarah, and how she'd always said love would find him again when he was ready. He hadn't been ready, but love had found him anyway, half frozen and desperate, in a torn wedding dress and with more courage than anyone he'd ever known. The cabin that had been built by grief had become a home built by hope. And outside, the Montana winter raged on, but inside, for the first time in 5 years, Ethan Carver was warm. The weeks that followed their wedding passed in a rhythm of discovery and adjustment. Winter held the valley in its grip, but inside the cabin, Ethan and Lydia built their own world, learning each other's habits and histories with the patience of people who understood second chances didn't come often. Lydia proved herself more capable than Ethan had imagined. She took over the household management with quiet efficiency, transforming his bachelor's dwelling into something that felt like a real home. She patched clothes he'd have thrown away, made meals from ingredients he'd never thought to combine, and brought an order to the chaos he hadn't realized he'd been living in. "How did you survive eating nothing but beans and salt pork?" she asked one morning, pulling a perfectly golden loaf of bread from the Dutch oven. "Didn't know there was another way," he admitted, breathing in the heavenly aroma. "Poor man. No wonder you're so thin." "I'm not thin. I'm lean. You're thin." She placed a thick slice of bread before him, slathered with the last of their butter. "But don't worry. I'll fix that." He caught her hand as she turned away. "Lydia, you don't have to earn your place here. You're not a servant." "I know." She squeezed his fingers. "But I want to contribute. This is my home now, too." The word home in her mouth did strange things to his chest. Sarah had called it a house, planning always for the home it would become when children filled it. Lydia called it home from the start, as if her presence alone was enough to transform it. But outside their small paradise, trouble was brewing. The first sign came 2 weeks after the wedding when Ethan found 3 of his cattle dead near the eastern boundary of his property. Not frozen or starved, their throats had been cut. "Wolves?" Lydia asked when he returned, though something in her tone suggested she already knew better. "Wolves don't use knives." He cleaned his rifle methodically, checking the action. "This is Callan's work." "You can't know that." "Can't prove it, you mean? But yes, I know it." She watched him prepare his weapons with growing alarm. "What are you going to do?" "Nothing yet. He wants me to react, do something stupid. I won't give him the satisfaction. But the cattle can be replaced. You can't. The way he said it, matter of fact and absolute, made her breath catch. You think he'd hurt me? I think Henry Callan is a man who doesn't like being told no. And between you rejecting him and me marrying you, we've told him no in the loudest way possible. That night, Ethan moved his rifle closer to the bed and started barring the door even when they were inside. Blue, sensing the tension, became more watchful, growling at sounds only he could hear. The second sign came a week later. Ethan had ridden to town for supplies, leaving Lydia with strict instructions to stay inside with the door barred. She'd rolled her eyes at his overprotectiveness, but promised to comply. The store was busier than usual, ranchers and farmers stocking up before another storm system moved in. Ethan nodded to those he knew, ignored the whispers that followed him. His marriage to Lydia was still the talk of the valley, some romantic, some scandalized, all curious. Carver. The voice was smooth as oil and twice as slippery. Ethan turned to find Henry Callan blocking his path, flanked by two of his hired hands. Pete Hutchins, the driver who'd abandoned Lydia, stood smirking behind his boss. Callan. How's married life treating you? Well enough. Must be quite an adjustment. Man like you used to living alone. And that little bride of yours, she must find frontier life challenging. She's tougher than she looks. Is she now? Callan's smile was all teeth. Still, accidents happen out here. Isolated cabin, nearest neighbor miles away. Why, anything could happen, and no one would know for hours. Days even. Ethan's hand drifted to his Colt. That sounds like a threat. Threat? Callan affected innocence. I'm merely observing the dangers of frontier living. Why would I threaten you? We're practically neighbors. Neighbors don't cut their neighbors' cattle's throats. The store had gone quiet, everyone listening while pretending not to. That's a serious accusation. I hope you have proof. I have enough. Enough for what? Ethan stepped closer, close enough that Callan's men tensed. Enough to know that if anything happens to my wife, my property, or even my dog, I'll come looking for exactly one man. And unlike you, Callan, I don't need hired guns to do my killing. Are you threatening me? In front of witnesses? I'm making you a promise. Stay away from what's mine. Yours. Callan's eyes glittered. Funny how quickly you've claimed her. Almost like you were waiting for the opportunity. Tell me, Carver, did you plan it? See a chance to steal what was meant for me? Nobody stole anything. You threw her away like trash. I just recognized treasure when I found it. The punch came fast, but Ethan was ready. He sidestepped Callan's swing and drove his fist into the man's stomach, doubling him over. Callan's men started forward, but the distinctive click of Sheriff Bradley cocking his shotgun stopped them cold. That's enough, Bradley said, having appeared from the back of the store. Callan, take your boys and get out. This isn't over, Callan wheezed, straightening slowly. It is unless you want to spend a night in my jail, Bradley said. Ethan, you too. Get your supplies and go home. Ethan gathered what he needed quickly, aware of every eye on him. As he loaded his horse, Bradley approached. You need to be careful, the sheriff said quietly. Callan's got money and influence. He can make life difficult. He's already trying. I mean, legally difficult. He's been asking questions about your land deed, your taxes, anything he can use against you. Let him look. Everything's in order. What about your wife? Her past? What about it? Callan sent telegrams back east, looking for information about her. Any scandals, debts, legal troubles? Ethan's jaw tightened. He won't find anything. You sure? I'm sure she's my wife, and that's all that matters. Bradley sighed. Just watch yourself, both of you. Callan's not the type to let grudges go. The ride home felt longer than usual, Ethan's mind churning over possibilities and dangers. When he finally crested the ridge overlooking his property, his heart nearly stopped. Smoke was rising from the direction of the cabin. He spurred his horse to a gallop, rifle already in hand, imagining the worst. But as he got closer, he realized the smoke was coming from the chimney, more smoke than usual, but controlled. Lydia met him at the door, flower in her hair and on her apron. You're back. Perfect timing. I've been baking.
The relief nearly buckled his knees. Baking? Mrs. Patterson from the boarding house came by, brought me some sourdough starter and a recipe for cinnamon rolls. I might have gotten carried away. Indeed, the cabin was filled with baked goods, bread, rolls, 2 pies cooling on the windowsill. You had a visitor. His voice came out sharper than intended. Yes, she was very kind. Why?
What's wrong? He told her about the encounter with Callan, watching her face pale. He's investigating me? Trying to find leverage. He won't find anything. She turned away, busying herself with unnecessary tidying. Everyone has secrets, Ethan. Not secrets that matter. How can you say that? You barely know me. I know enough. You know what I've told you. He crossed to her, turning her to face him. Then tell me what you haven't. She met his eyes, hers bright with unshed tears. What if it changes things? The only thing that could change things is if you're still married to someone else, and somehow I doubt that. Despite everything, she laughed. No, not that. Then what? She pulled away, pacing to the window. My father didn't just die of consumption, he killed himself. Drank poison when the debts got too bad, left me to deal with the creditors. I had to sell everything, our home, his books, my mother's jewelry. Everything except that damned wedding dress, which I'd already made for Thomas before he chose money over me. Ethan waited, knowing there was more. I didn't just work in a factory. I worked in a brothel, not that, as a seamstress, mending the girls' dresses, making them new ones. It was the only place that would hire me after word got out about my father's suicide. Respectable places wouldn't touch me. That's all. She whirled on him. All? Ethan, if Callan finds out, we'll deal with it. Lydia, you did what you had to do to survive. There's no shame in that. Society would disagree. Society's not married to you, I am. And if the whole town turns against us, then we'll have each other. That's enough for me. Is it enough for you? She crossed back to him, reaching up to cup his face. You're either the best man I've ever met or the most foolish. Probably both. She kissed him then, pouring everything she couldn't say into the contact. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, she whispered, I love you. The words hit him like a physical blow. He'd been feeling it for days, this wild, impossible emotion that had taken root during the storm and grown with each passing hour. But hearing her say it first, I love you too, he said roughly. God help me. I fell in love with you the moment you collapsed in my door, half dead and still fighting. That's a terrible moment to fall in love. Terrible timing, something of a specialty of mine. They might have continued, but Blue suddenly erupted in furious barking, racing to the door with his hackles raised. Ethan grabbed his rifle, pushing Lydia behind him. Who's there? Mr. Carver? It's James Patterson. My mother sent me with something for your missus. Ethan relaxed slightly but didn't lower the rifle as he opened the door. James Patterson was all of 16, gangly and earnest. He held a covered basket, looking nervous. Ma said Mrs. Carver forgot this when she visited. Lydia peered around Ethan. Oh, the preserves! How thoughtful. Thank you, James. The boy blushed crimson when she smiled at him. Yes, ma'am. Ma also said to tell you there's a quilting circle every Tuesday if you're interested. I'd love that. After the boy left, Ethan studied the normalcy of the moment, his wife being invited to social events, neighbors sharing preserves. Maybe this will work out after all. Don't jinx it, Lydia warned, but she was smiling. That night, as they lay tangled together in the aftermath of lovemaking, Lydia traced patterns on his chest. Tell me about the war. Not much to tell. You were at Antietam. That was one of the bloodiest battles. Yes? Which side? Does it matter? No. Just curious. Confederate. Not by choice, got conscripted. Farm boys didn't get much say in the matter. Is that why you came west? To escape the memories? Partly. Mostly to escape the carpetbaggers and Reconstruction. Wanted to go somewhere a man could build something without the past haunting every step. But the past always follows. Until a blizzard brings the future to your door. She smiled against his skin. Sweet talker. Only with you. The next morning brought a new challenge. Ethan woke to find Lydia vomiting into the chamber pot, her face gray with nausea. "Something I ate," she gasped between heaves. But it happened the next morning too. And the next. "I should fetch the doctor," Ethan said, worry eating at him. "No doctor." She wiped her mouth, attempting a smile. "Ethan, I think I know what this is." "Food poisoning?" "No, you dear, dense man. I think I'm pregnant." The words didn't make sense at first. Pregnant, with child, his child. But we've only been married 3 weeks, and we've been very thorough in our marital duties. Pregnant. He sat heavily on the bed. "You're sure?" "Not completely, but I've missed my monthly, and this sickness, my mother had it with all her pregnancies. A baby. Are you upset?" He looked at her, really looked, pale and sick and worried, carrying his child. Their child. "Upset?" "Lydia, I'm terrified and thrilled in equal measure. Really. Sarah and I tried for years. Nothing ever took. I thought maybe I couldn't. Apparently you can." He pulled her into his arms, holding her like spun glass. "A baby. Our baby." "Our baby," she confirmed, then promptly turned to be sick again. The revelation changed everything and nothing. Ethan became even more protective, if that was possible. He took over the heavy chores despite her protests and started making plans for an addition to the cabin. "We'll need a proper room for the baby," he said, sketching out rough plans. "And eventually more rooms. Can't have just one child out here." "Already planning a large family? Aren't you?" She smiled, hand resting on her still flat stomach. "I'd like that. A house full of children." "Then we'd better get building." But their happiness was short-lived. 3 days later, Ethan woke to the sound of horses. Many horses. He was out of bed and reaching for his rifle when the torch crashed through the window. The oil-soaked rag wrapped around it caught the curtains immediately, flames racing up the fabric Lydia had just hung the day before. "Fire!" Ethan shouted, pushing Lydia toward the door. "Get out!" Another torch came through the back window, then another through the side. "They're surrounding us!" Lydia gasped. Ethan grabbed blankets, trying to smother the flames, but they were spreading too fast. The dry wood of the cabin, sealed with pitch, caught like kindling. "We have to go." He wrapped Lydia in his coat, grabbed his rifle and ammunition. "Stay close to me." They burst out the door to find chaos. Men on horses, at least 6 of them, faces covered with bandanas. Not Callan, he was too smart to do this himself. But his men, certainly. Ethan fired, and one man cried out, clutching his shoulder. The others scattered, but not far. "Carver!" a voice called out. Not Callan. Pete Hutchins. "This is just the beginning. Get out of the valley while you still can." Ethan fired again, but they were already riding off, their damage done. He turned back to the cabin. The fire was consuming it, flames already through the roof. Everything they owned, everything they'd built, turning to ash. "The photograph," Lydia said suddenly. Sarah's photograph. Before he could stop her, she darted back toward the inferno. "Lydia, no!" But she was already through the door. Ethan followed, the heat hitting him like a physical wall. Smoke filled his lungs immediately. He found her by the shelf, reaching for the photograph. "Leave it! No! She's part of your history, our history." She grabbed the frame just as the beam above them groaned and cracked. Ethan tackled her, driving them both toward the door as the roof began to collapse. They tumbled out into the snow just as the cabin's main beam gave way, the structure folding in on itself with a roar. They sat in the snow, watching their home burn. Lydia still clutched the photograph, its frame singed but intact. "You could have died," Ethan said, his voice raw from smoke and emotion. "But I didn't. For a photograph. For your memories. For our future. So our children will know where they came from." He pulled her against him, both of them shaking. "You're more important than any memory. And you're important enough to preserve memories for." Blue found them there as dawn broke, the cabin reduced to smoking ruins. The dog whined, pressing against them, offering what comfort he could. What do we do now? Lydia asked, her voice small. We survive. We rebuild. We don't let them win. Where will we go? The barn's still standing. It'll do for now. Ethan, I can't. The baby. I know. We'll figure it out. Together. They salvaged what they could from the ruins. A few singed pots. The metal box where Ethan kept his money and important papers, buried under ash but intact. Lydia's wedding dress, which she'd stored in a trunk, was gone. Their clothes, their food stores, their books, all gone. But they were alive. Sheriff Bradley arrived by noon, having seen the smoke from town. His face was grim as he surveyed the damage. Anyone see who did it? 6 men, faces covered, Ethan reported, but Pete Hutchins' voice is distinctive. That's not enough for an arrest. I know. Callan was in town all night, playing cards at the saloon with a dozen witnesses. Of course he was. Bradley dismounted, walking through the still warm ashes. This is escalating, Ethan. Maybe you should… What? Leave? Let him drive us out? Think about your wife. Is pride worth risking her life? It's not about pride, Lydia said, stepping forward. It's about right and wrong. If we run now, he wins. And what's to stop him from doing this to the next person who stands up to him? Ma'am, with respect, you don't know what Callan's capable of. I know he left me to die in a blizzard. I know he burned our home. I know he's a coward who sends others to do his dirty work. Her voice rose. And I know my husband is worth 10 of him. Bradley looked between them. You're determined to stay? This is our land, Ethan said simply. Then you'll need help. I'll send some men out, see if we can find evidence. After Bradley left, they set about making the barn habitable. It wasn't much, meant for horses, not humans, but it had walls and a roof. Ethan strung up blankets to create a small living space, while Lydia swept out the stalls and spread fresh straw. It's not so bad, she said, trying for optimism. Plenty of people start with less. You deserve better. I have what I need. You, Blue, and this little one. She touched her stomach. The rest is just things. That night, huddled together in the hay with Blue pressed against them for warmth, Ethan made plans. He'd rebuild, but smarter this time. Stone foundation, less flammable materials. And he'd make Callan pay, though he didn't know how yet. I can hear you thinking, Lydia murmured against his chest. Sorry, did I wake you? Hard to sleep when your pillow is plotting revenge. Not revenge, justice. Sometimes they look the same. Sometimes they are. She was quiet for a moment, then, whatever you're planning, we do it together. Lydia, no, we're partners in everything. Partners don't let their pregnant wives fight their battles. Partners don't treat their wives like porcelain dolls either. You're carrying our child. Which makes me a mother defending her family, not a helpless victim. He knew that tone. Sarah had had it too, when her mind was made up. Stubborn woman. You married me. Best decision I ever made. Even now, with nothing but ash and a barn to our names? Especially now. Adversity shows who people really are. And you, Lydia Carver, are magnificent. The next day brought unexpected allies. Mrs. Patterson arrived first, her wagon loaded with supplies. Heard about the fire, she said briskly. Terrible accident. Wasn't an accident, Ethan said. I know. She handed down blankets, preserves, a ham. But officially, it was an accident. Safer that way. Throughout the day, others came. The Reverend with clothes and boots, Old Man Thompson with tools and nails, even families Ethan barely knew, bringing what they could spare. Why? Lydia asked Mrs. Watson, who'd brought a whole chicken and vegetables for soup. Because Callan's pushed around folks for too long. Because you two had the courage to stand up to him. And because that's what neighbors do. Not everyone helped. Some rode by, staring at the ruins, but offering nothing. Ethan noted who helped and who didn't, filing it away. As the sun set, they had enough supplies to last weeks, and promises of more to come. The barn was almost comfortable,
with a proper stove someone had donated and real beds from the boarding house. "See?" Lydia said, stirring the soup on their new old stove. "We're not alone." "No," Ethan agreed, watching her work. "We're not." But Callan wasn't done. The next market day, Lydia went to town for supplies while Ethan worked on clearing the cabin's ruins. She returned hours earlier than expected, her face streaked with tears. What happened? Nothing. Everything. She sank onto a crate, shoulders shaking. Someone had spread rumors about my past, the brothel. Ethan's hands clenched. Callan. Women crossed the street to avoid me. The shopkeeper served me but wouldn't look me in the eye. And someone called me a whore. The rage that filled him was ice cold and absolute. Who? It doesn't matter. It does to me. Ethan, no. Violence won't solve this. But it'll make me feel better. Despite everything, she laughed, watery but real. You can't fight the whole town. Watch me. She stood, crossing to him. I don't need you to fight them. I need you to love me. Can you do that? Even knowing everyone knows? Especially knowing. He pulled her close. Let them talk. They don't know you. They don't know what you've survived, what you're capable of. I'm scared they'll turn that judgment on you, on our child. Then we'll teach our child that other people's opinions matter less than integrity. That courage isn't the absence of fear, but acting despite it. When did you become so wise? About 5 minutes after you knocked on my door. She kissed him then, pouring gratitude and love and determination into it. When they broke apart, her chin was raised, eyes bright with purpose. We're going to win this. Yes, we are. Not with violence, with persistence, with dignity. We're going to rebuild and thrive and show everyone that we can't be broken. That's my girl. That night, Ethan was awakened by Blue's warning growl. He reached for his rifle, listening. Footsteps, trying to be quiet but crunching in the snow. Stay here, he whispered to Lydia. Like hell. She grabbed the shotgun they'd been given, checking it was loaded. Together, they crept to the barn door. On 3, Ethan mouthed. But before he could count, the door exploded inward. Pete Hutchins stood there, gun drawn, 2 other men behind him. Drop the weapons, Hutchins ordered. Get off my land, Ethan countered, rifle steady. Not your land much longer. Mr. Callan's buying your note from the bank. You'll be foreclosed by week's end. The hell he is. I don't have a note. Land's paid clear. Hutchins smiled, ugly and triumphant. About that. Seems there was a clerical error. Your deed was never properly filed. Makes your claim invalid. That's a lie. Got the paperwork right here. He pulled out a document. Judge signed it this afternoon. Ethan knew without looking it would be Judge Hoffman, who owed Callan money from poker debts. Even if that were true, squatters' rights don't apply when there's a prior claim. Turns out Mr. Callan filed on this land years ago, just hadn't enforced it out of neighborly courtesy. Neighborly courtesy. Ethan's voice was flat. That what you call burning a man's house? Don't know nothing about that. Heard it was an accident, tragic. Hutchins' grin widened. Mr. Callan's generous, though. Willing to buy you out. $1,000 for you to leave, tonight. Go to hell. $1,500, final offer. I said. The shotgun blast was deafening in the enclosed space. Hutchins screamed, clutching his leg where Lydia's shot had peppered him with buckshot. The lady said no, Lydia stated, already reloading. The 2 men behind Hutchins went for their guns, but Ethan's rifle stopped them. I wouldn't. My wife's in a mood, and I'm not inclined to stop her. You shot me! Hutchins gasped. You actually shot me! Just your leg, Lydia said conversationally. Next one's higher. Want to guess how much higher? Hutchins paled. You're crazy. I'm pregnant, recently burned out of my home, and extremely irritable. Crazy doesn't begin to cover it. We're leaving, one of the other men said, helping Hutchins up. But this ain't over. It is if you're smart, Ethan said. Tell Callan we're not going anywhere, and if he sends anyone else, my wife's aim might be less generous. After they left, Ethan turned to Lydia in amazement. You shot him. He threatened my family. She set the shotgun down, hands suddenly shaking. Oh God, I shot someone. You were magnificent. I might be sick. That's fair. She was sick, but afterward she looked at him with steel in her eyes. We need help. Legal help. Callan's buying judges, creating false documents. We can't fight that alone. What do you suggest? I don't know, but there has to be someone. Some authority higher than Callan's reach. Ethan thought about it. There was one possibility, though it was a long shot. There's a federal marshal in Helena, Samuel Grant. We served together in the war. He might help. How far is Helena? 3 days' ride, 4 in this weather. Then we go tomorrow. Lydia, you can't travel that far, not in your condition. Watch me. And he knew she meant it. His gentle seamstress from Philadelphia had become a frontier warrior, and God help anyone who stood in her way. The next morning they prepared for the journey, knowing they were leaving their property vulnerable but having no choice. The neighbors would watch, but there was only so much they could do.
As they mounted their horses, Lydia insisting she was fine to ride, she looked back at the ruins of their cabin, then at the barn that had become their temporary home. "We'll be back," she said, and it sounded like a vow. "Yes," Ethan agreed. "We will." They rode out as snow began to fall again, 2 people against a wealthy man's influence, armed with nothing but determination and hope that somewhere justice still existed. Behind them, Blue howled, left to guard what remained of their American dream. The road to Helena stretched before them like a frozen river, winding through valleys and over ridges that seemed to touch the gray winter sky. They'd been riding for 6 hours when Lydia finally swayed in her saddle, her face pale as parchment. "We're stopping," Ethan declared, steering them toward a grove of pines that offered some shelter from the wind. "I'm fine," she protested, but her voice was weak. "You're not fine. You're pregnant and exhausted and stubborn as a mule. Takes one to know one." He helped her down from her horse, alarmed at how she trembled. The morning sickness had been bad enough in the comfort of their barn, but on horseback in freezing weather, it was taking a terrible toll. "We should go back," he said, spreading blankets on the ground and building a quick fire. "No. We've come too far. Lydia, if we turn back now, Callan wins. He's counting on us being weak, on me being a liability." She accepted the water he offered, sipping carefully. "I won't be the reason we lose our home." "You could never be that." "I could if I don't see this through." They rested for an hour, Lydia dozing against his shoulder while he kept watch. The land around them was silent except for the occasional crack of ice-laden branches. It was the kind of quiet that could mean peace or danger, and Ethan had learned never to trust it completely. When they mounted again, Lydia seemed stronger, though he knew it was mostly determination holding her upright. They made it to Garrison's trading post by nightfall, a rough establishment that served as way station for travelers brave or foolish enough to traverse the mountain passes in winter. The proprietor, a grizzled former trapper named Jake Garrison, took one look at Lydia and shook his head. "Woman's got no business traveling in her condition." "Woman's got ears and can speak for herself," Lydia replied tartly. Jake grinned, showing gaps where teeth used to be. "Feisty one. All right then. Got a room and back, relatively clean. $2 for the night, includes supper." "Highway robbery," Ethan muttered, but paid without real complaint. Lydia needed a proper bed and hot food. The room was small but warm, and the stew Jake's Shoshone wife served was hearty and filling. Lydia ate every bite, color slowly returning to her cheeks. "Tell me about this marshal," she said as they prepared for bed. "Can we trust him?" "Sam Grant's the most honest man I know. We were at Antietam together, saved each other's lives more than once. If anyone can help us, it's him." "Why didn't you contact him before?" Ethan was quiet for a moment. "Pride, I suppose. Didn't want to seem like I couldn't handle my own problems. And now? Now I have more than myself to think about." He placed his hand gently on her still flat stomach. "Pride's a luxury I can't afford anymore." She covered his hand with hers. "Do you think it'll be a boy or girl?" "Doesn't matter, as long as it's healthy." "But if you had to guess?" "Girl, stubborn and brave like her mother. Or a boy, protective and strong like his father. Either way, they'll be born into a fight. Then we'll teach them to fight well." That night, Ethan woke to voices in the main room of the trading post. He recognized Jake's gravelly tone, but the other voices were unfamiliar.
Carefully, he slipped from bed, grabbing his colt. "They're definitely here," someone was saying. "Horses match the description." "I don't know nothing about that," Jake replied. "Lots of folks come through."
"Don't lie to us, old man. Carver and his whore are here somewhere." Ethan's blood boiled at the slur, but he forced himself to stay calm. He woke Lydia with a gentle touch to her shoulder, pressing a finger to her lips when her eyes opened. "Trouble," he whispered. "Get dressed." Quietly. She nodded, moving with impressive silence for someone who'd been dead asleep moments before. They gathered their things quickly, Ethan calculating their options. The window was too small and too high. The only exit was through the main room. "What's it worth to you if they're here, Sais?" Jake was saying, buying them time. $50 for information, $100 if you help us take them. That's a lot of money. Mr. Callan pays well for good service. Let me think on it. Have a drink while I check on something. Footsteps approached their door. 3 knocks, then 2, then 1. A pattern. Ethan opened the door a crack. Jake stood there, his weathered face grim. "Back window in the storage room," he whispered. "Horses are already saddled out back. Go now." "Jake? I owe no loyalty to Callan. Man threatened my wife once, saying Indians had no business in civilized establishments. You go on. I'll delay them." They slipped through the trading post's back rooms, Lydia's hand in Ethan's, trusting him to guide them through the darkness. The storage room window was barely large enough, but they managed to squeeze through, dropping into the snow outside. Their horses were there as promised, stamping nervously. As they mounted, they heard shouting from inside the trading post. "They're running! Circle around! Don't let them reach the pass!" Ethan spurred his horse, Lydia close behind. The night erupted in chaos. Gunshots cracking through the cold air, voices shouting directions. A bullet whistled past Ethan's ear, too close. "Into the trees!" he shouted. They plunged into the forest, branches tearing at their clothes, snow cascading from disturbed boughs. Behind them, their pursuers crashed through the undergrowth, but the darkness and dense trees worked in the fugitives' favor. They rode hard for an hour, using every trick Ethan knew to lose their trail, doubling back, riding through streams, using rocky ground where their horses' hooves wouldn't leave clear prints. Finally, when he was sure they'd lost their pursuers, he led them to a small cave he remembered from hunting trips. "We'll rest here until dawn," he said, helping Lydia down. She was shaking again. Whether from cold or fear or exhaustion, he couldn't tell. "They found us so quickly," she said. "How?" "Callan must have men watching all the routes out of the valley. We were naive to think we could just ride to Helena unchallenged. So what do? We get creative." They spent a miserable night in the cave, huddled together for warmth, taking turns keeping watch. At first light, Ethan studied their surroundings, formulating a plan. "We can't take the main road," he said, "but there's an old mining trail that goes over Morrison Ridge. It's rough, dangerous in winter, but it'll get us to Helena." "How dangerous?" "Very, but less dangerous than meeting Callan's men again." The mining trail was worse than rough. It was nearly impassable. They had to dismount and lead the horses through sections where the path narrowed to barely a ledge, with a sheer drop on one side and rock wall on the other. Snow made every step treacherous. "Don't look down," Ethan advised as they navigated a particularly narrow section. "Wasn't planning on it," Lydia replied through gritted teeth. Halfway across, her horse spooked at something. A bird, a shifting shadow, they never knew. The animal reared, its back hooves slipping on ice. For a heart-stopping moment, horse and rider teetered on the edge of the abyss. Ethan lunged forward, grabbing the horse's bridle with one hand and Lydia's arm with the other, using all his strength to pull them back from the edge. They collapsed onto the trail, breathing hard, the horse trembling between them. "That was close," Lydia gasped. "Too close." He pulled her against him, feeling her heart race against his chest. "We should turn back." "No, we've come this far. I won't let fear stop us now." They continued, even more careful, and by late afternoon they'd cleared the worst of it. The trail widened as they descended toward Helena, and they could finally ride normally again. "Look," Lydia pointed ahead. Helena sprawled before them, larger than their little town, with proper buildings and busy streets. Smoke rose from dozens of chimneys, and they could hear the distant sound of commerce and life. Civilization, Ethan said with relief. They found a boarding house run by a German widow named Mrs. Schultz, who took one look at Lydia and immediately began fussing over her, insisting she needed rest and proper food. "Your wife is with child, yes," she said to Ethan. "She needs care, not riding around countryside like Cowboy." "I'm perfectly capable," Lydia began. "You are perfectly exhausted is what you are. Come, hot bath, then food, then sleep. Business can wait until tomorrow." Ethan was inclined to agree. Lydia looked ready to drop, and they'd need to be sharp when they met with Marshal Grant. That evening, clean and fed, they sat in their small but comfortable room planning their approach. "We need proof," Lydia said. "Our word against Callan's won't be enough. Sam will believe me." "But can he act on belief alone? Callan's rich, influential. We need evidence of his crimes." She was right, of course. Ethan thought about what they had: the burned cabin, the dead cattle, the attack at the trading post. All circumstantial, nothing that directly tied to Callan. "Wait," Lydia said suddenly. "The note." "The one Callan wrote dismissing me. It's in his handwriting. That proves he abandoned you, not that he's trying to steal our land. But it proves his character. And if we could get other people to come forward, people he's hurt or cheated. That's a big if. Most folks are too scared of him. Then we need to make them more scared of letting him continue." The next morning, they found the federal marshal's office in a brick building near the center of town. Samuel Grant looked exactly as Ethan remembered: tall, lean, with penetrating gray eyes and prematurely silver hair from the war. "Ethan Carver," he said, rising from his desk with genuine pleasure. "I'll be damned. Thought you were dead." Came close a few times. They clasped hands, the greeting of old soldiers who'd seen too much together. "Sam, this is my wife, Lydia." "Ma'am." Sam tipped his hat. "Please, sit. You look like you've had a rough journey." They told him everything, starting with Lydia's arrival and ending with their flight from the trading post. Sam listened without interruption, his expression growing darker with each detail. "Henry Callan," he said when they finished. "I've heard the name. Nothing I could act on, but rumors of strong-arm tactics, possible claim jumping. So you can help us?" Lydia asked hopefully. Sam sighed. "It's complicated. Destroying property, attempted murder, those are serious crimes. But proving Callan ordered them, that's the challenge. Men like him are careful to keep their hands clean." "There has to be something," Ethan insisted. "Maybe." Sam pulled out a map. "Your land. Show me exactly where it is." Ethan pointed out their property, describing the boundaries. Sam studied the map intently. "Interesting. Your land sits right on the proposed railroad route." "Railroad?" "Northern Pacific. They're surveying for a line through that valley. Land along the route will be worth 10 times its current value." "That's why Callan wants it," Lydia breathed. "He knows about the railroad." "Likely has inside information," Sam agreed, "which might be our leverage. If he's using illegal means to acquire land for profit from a federal project, that's something I can investigate." "So you'll help us?" "I'll do more than that. I'm coming back with you." "Sam, you don't have to." "Yes, I do. You saved my life at Antietam, Ethan, but more than that, this is exactly the kind of corruption the federal government sent me here to stop." He stood, already planning. "We'll need a few days to prepare. I'll wire for additional deputies, gather what information I can about Callan's dealings." "We don't have a few days," Lydia said urgently. "Every moment we're gone, he could be destroying more evidence, threatening more people." "I understand your urgency, ma'am, but if we're going to take down someone like Callan, we need to do it right. One shot, no mistakes." That evening, while Sam made his preparations, Ethan and Lydia walked through Helena's streets. It was a proper town, with shops and restaurants, even a small theater. "We could stay here," Lydia said suddenly. "What?" "Start over, find work, raise our child in civilization instead of the frontier." Ethan stopped walking, turning to face her. "Is that what you want?" She considered the question. A month ago, maybe. But now, that land is ours. We bled for it, fought for it. Sarah is buried there. Our child was conceived there. I don't want to run. Even if staying might be dangerous, especially then. I don't want our child growing up thinking their parents were cowards. Have I told you lately that I love you? Not since this morning. Shameful neglect. I love you, Lydia Carver. And I love you, Ethan Carver. They were interrupted by someone calling Ethan's name. Turning, they saw a woman approaching, well-dressed, pretty in a china doll way, with elaborate blonde curls. Ethan? Ethan Carver? It really is you. Ethan stiffened. Catherine. The woman, Catherine, reached them, slightly breathless. Her eyes flicked to Lydia, taking in her simple dress and rounded belly before dismissing her. I heard you were in town. I couldn't believe it. After all these years. Lydia, this is Catherine Morrison. Catherine, my wife. Lydia. Wife? Catherine's perfect composure cracked slightly. You remarried? Sarah died 5 years ago. Yes, I heard. I'm so sorry. She didn't sound sorry. And you're living where now? Still in that little cabin? We have a ranch, Lydia said coolly. Catherine's laugh tinkled like breaking glass. A ranch? How rustic. I suppose some people are suited for that life. Some people are suited for honest work, Lydia replied. Others prefer to marry for money and comfort. The two women stared at each other, the air crackling with unspoken hostility. Well, Catherine said finally, lovely to see you, Ethan. You're looking weathered. Frontier life clearly agrees with you. She swept away, her expensive skirts swishing. Old friend? Lydia asked, her tone deceptively mild. Old mistake. We were engaged once, before Sarah. She broke it off when a banker's son showed interest. She seems to regret that decision. Her husband died last year, left her comfortable but lonely, from what I hear. And she thought perhaps you'd be available again. Perhaps. Are you disappointed that you're not? Ethan pulled her close, his hand resting on her belly. The only thing I'm disappointed about is that I didn't meet you sooner. Smooth talker. Only with you. They returned to find Sam had been busy. He'd assembled 3 deputies and gathered intelligence on Callan's operations. It's worse than you know, he told them. Callan's been systematically acquiring land along the proposed railroad route. At least 6 families have sold under suspicious circumstances: fires, dead livestock, threats. Can they testify? Most have left the territory, but I found 2 who might talk if they knew they had protection. Who? The Jacobson family and Old Man Patterson, not related to Mrs. Patterson from your town. Both lost land to Callan in the last year. We should talk to them, Lydia said. Tomorrow. Tonight, rest. You look exhausted, ma'am. She did look tired, the pregnancy and travel taking their toll, but her eyes burned with determination. I'll rest when Callan's in jail. That could take time. Then he'd better hope I don't give birth in the courtroom because nothing's stopping me from seeing this through. Sam looked at Ethan with raised eyebrows. Fierce woman you married. You have no idea. The next day they visited the Jacobsons, a Norwegian family farming just outside Helena. Their story was depressingly familiar: threats, destroyed crops, a suspicious fire, finally selling for a fraction of their land's worth just to escape. We couldn't prove nothing, Mr. Jacobson said, his English heavily accented. Callan, he's too smart. Always somewhere else when bad things happen. Would you testify to what happened? Sam asked. Against Callan? The man's face paled. He would kill us. Not if he's in prison, Lydia said gently. And he will be, if enough people stand up to him. Mrs. Jacobson, who'd been silent, suddenly spoke. They killed our dog. Our son's dog. Left it on our porch as warning. I'm sorry, Lydia said, and something in her voice made the woman look at her sharply. You understand. You've lost things too. Our home, our peace, almost our lives. But we're fighting back. And if you lose, then at least we tried. At least our children will know we tried. The Jacobsons exchanged looks. Finally, Mr. Jacobson nodded. We will testify. But only if you have real case, real chance to win. Old man Patterson was less cooperative. I said my piece when I sold. Got nothing more to say. He threatened you, Sam stated. Prove it. We're trying to. With your help. My help got my barn burned and my horses poisoned. I'm done helping. They left discouraged, but Sam remained optimistic. One witness is better than none. And once we get back to your valley, others might be emboldened to speak up. Speak up. Or they might be too terrified, Ethan said. Faith, my friend. Sometimes doing the right thing is contagious. They prepared to leave Helena the next morning, now a party of 7 with Sam and his 3 deputies. The deputies were young but competent-looking, armed with federal authority and decent rifles. Stay in formation, Sam instructed. We're expecting trouble, so keep alert. They weren't disappointed. 20 miles out of Helena, they encountered a roadblock, fallen trees across the path, clearly cut and placed deliberately. Ambush, Ethan said quietly, scanning the tree line. Everyone dismount, Sam ordered. Take cover. They'd barely gotten behind rocks when the shooting started. Bullets whined overhead, striking sparks from stone. Federal marshals, Sam shouted. Cease fire or face federal charges. The response was more gunfire. Lydia pressed against a boulder, clutching the pistol Ethan had given her. Her face was pale but determined. How many? One of the deputies asked. 6, maybe 7, Ethan estimated. Spread along the ridge. We can flank them, Sam said. Johnson, Smith, work your way left. Ethan, you're with me on the right. Williams, stay with Mrs. Carver. Be careful, Lydia whispered, gripping Ethan's hand. Always am. They moved out, using cover and experience to work their way up the slope. The attackers, focused on the original position, didn't notice until too late. Ethan came up behind one man, rifle pressed to his back before he could react. Drop it. The man complied, and Ethan recognized him, one of Callan's ranch hands. Federal custody, Sam announced, his voice carrying. Anyone still fighting will be charged with attempted murder of federal officers. The gunfire stopped. One by one, the attackers surrendered or fled. They captured 4 men, all known associates of Callan. He'll claim he knew nothing about this, Sam said, securing the prisoners. He always does, Ethan agreed. But now we have federal witnesses to attempted murder. That changes things. They continued toward the valley. The captured men tied and walking, slowing their progress. They had to camp one more night on the trail, everyone tense and watchful. I'm scared, Lydia admitted to Ethan as they lay under the stars. Of Callan? Of hoping. What if we do everything right and still lose? Then we know we fought the good fight. That's not enough. Not anymore. I want our child to have a home, a future. They will. Promise? I promise we'll do everything in our power to make it so. That's not the same thing. It's the only promise I can honestly make. She was quiet for a moment. It's enough. You're enough. They reached the valley the next afternoon to find chaos. The town was in an uproar, people gathered in the streets shouting and arguing. Sheriff Bradley met them, looking haggard. Thank God you're back. It's been madness. What happened? Callan's been consolidating power. Says he owns half the valley now, including your land. He's got Judge Hoffman backing him, false deeds, the whole thing. And anyone who protests, what? The miller's barn burned night before last. The Reverend's horse was shot. Mrs. Patterson's boarding house had all its windows broken. He's declaring war on the whole town, Lydia said, horrified. Pretty much, Bradley agreed. Folks are scared. Some are talking about leaving. Where's Callan now? Sam asked. His ranch, surrounded by hired guns. Maybe 20 men. 20 against 7, one of the deputies muttered. Not 7, Ethan said, looking at the crowd. Time to see if Sam was right about doing the right thing being contagious. He climbed onto a wagon, raising his voice. Listen to me. All of you, I know you're scared. Callan wants you scared. But this is our valley, our home. Are we going to let one man drive us out? Easy for you to say, someone shouted. You brought the federal marshal. Yes, I did. Because sometimes we need help. There's no shame in that. But the marshal can't fight for us. He can only help us fight for ourselves. Callan's got 20 guns. And we've got 50 families, 100 if we count the outlying farms.
You telling me we can't muster 20 men to stand up for what's right? I'll stand, a voice called out. Old Man Thompson stepped forward. Lost my eldest to men like Callan in the war. Won't lose my home to one now. And me, said another. Then another. Within an hour they had 30 men, armed and ready. Not gunfighters, but farmers and shopkeepers and cowboys who'd had enough. This could get ugly, Sam warned Ethan privately. It's already ugly. At least now it's a fair fight. They rode out to Callan's ranch as the sun was setting, their makeshift army spread out in a long line. Callan's men saw them coming, scrambling to defensive positions. Callan himself emerged onto his porch, dressed as always in his finest suit. Marshal Grant, this is private property. Mr. Callan, I have warrants for your arrest on charges of conspiracy, attempted murder, and land fraud. Warrants based on what evidence? The testimony of 4 of your men caught attacking federal officers, plus additional witnesses to your various crimes. Lies and slander. Then you won't mind coming peacefully to answer the charges? Callan laughed. I think not. You're outnumbered, Marshal. Count again, Ethan called out. Callan's eyes widened as he saw the line of townspeople. You brought civilians into this? They'll run at the first shot. Try us, Mrs. Patterson said, hefting a rifle. Some of us have been waiting years for this moment. The tension stretched taut. Fingers hovered over triggers. One wrong move would start a bloodbath. Then Lydia rode forward alone, stopping just out of easy rifle range. What's she doing? Sam hissed. Being Lydia, Ethan said, his heart in his throat. Henry Callan, she called out, her voice carrying clearly. You left me to die in a blizzard. You burned my home. You've terrorized this valley for years. And for what? Money? Power? Is it worth it? Get back, woman. This doesn't concern you. It concerns me more than anyone. I'm carrying the future of this valley in my womb. My child will grow up here, will know that their mother stood up to tyranny. What will your legacy be? That you were rich? That you were feared? Or that you were finally stopped by the very people you tried to crush? Pretty words won't save you. No, but truth might. She pulled out a telegram. This came yesterday while you were busy threatening our neighbors. It's from the Northern Pacific Railroad. Seems they're very interested in why someone's been illegally acquiring land along their proposed route using their inside information. Callan went white. That's impossible. Your friend Mr. Morrison in Helena? The railroad executive you've been bribing? He made a deal for immunity. Told them everything. It was a bluff, Ethan realized. A magnificent, dangerous bluff. But Callan didn't know that. You're lying. Am I? Check for yourself. Wire Helena. Ask about Morrison. Ask about the federal investigation into railroad land fraud. Doubt flickered in Callan's eyes. Some of his men exchanged uncertain glances. Even if that were true, it is true. And you know what else is true? You're finished. Your men can die defending you, or they can walk away now with amnesty. Marshal Grant, will you offer amnesty to any of Callan's men who surrender peacefully? Sam caught on quickly. Full amnesty for anyone who lays down arms now. This offer expires in 60 seconds. Don't listen to them, Callan shouted, but the damage was done. One man set down his rifle and walked away. Then another. Then 3 more. Like a dam breaking, Callan's army dissolved, men choosing freedom over loyalty to a lost cause. Stop! Callan screamed. I'm paying you. Not enough to die for, one man said as he passed. In the end, only Pete Hutchins and 2 others remained with Callan. It's over, Sam said, riding forward with his deputies. Come peacefully or come hard, but you're coming. Callan pulled a hidden derringer, aiming at Lydia. If I'm going down... Ethan's shot took him in the shoulder, spinning him around. The derringer flew from his hand. Callan crumpled on his porch, clutching his wound, whimpering. That's for threatening my wife, Ethan said calmly. Be grateful I didn't aim lower. They arrested Callan and his remaining men,
the whole town watching as the man who'd terrorized them for years was led away in chains. "You did it," Mrs. Patterson said to Lydia, tears streaming down her face. "You actually did it." "We did it," Lydia corrected. "All of us." That night, the town celebrated. Someone brought out a fiddle, someone else a guitar. Dancing broke out in the street despite the cold. Ethan and Lydia watched from the boarding house porch, her head on his shoulder. "That was incredibly brave and incredibly stupid," he told her. "It worked." "You couldn't have known that." "I knew you'd protect me." "You always do." "What if I'd missed?" "You never miss when it matters." They were quiet for a moment, watching their neighbors dance with joy and relief. "We need to rebuild," Ethan said. "We will. But better this time, stronger. Stone foundation, bigger rooms, a proper nursery, a library." "A library?" "Our children should have books, education. The frontier's changing, Ethan. We need to change with it. Our children, plural. At least 3. 3? Maybe 4. He laughed, pulling her closer. "We'd better get started on that house then." Spring came to the valley like a blessing after the harsh winter, melting snow revealing green shoots that promised renewal. The foundation of their new home was already laid, stone and mortar that would resist any fire. The whole community had pitched in, turning the rebuilding into a celebration of their collective victory over Callan's tyranny. Lydia, now visibly pregnant, directed the construction with the efficiency of a general, despite Ethan's protests that she should be resting. "The baby's not due for 3 more months," she reminded him for the 100th time. "I'm pregnant, not invalid." "Sarah always said the same thing," Mrs. Mills mentioned, having come to help with organizing the kitchen space. "Right up until the day She stopped, mortified. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't have—" "It's all right," Lydia said gently. "I want to hear about Sarah. She's part of this place's history, part of Ethan's history." Mrs. Mills glanced at Ethan, who nodded. "Sarah was stubborn, as they come. Worked right up until her time, then delivered little James like it was nothing more troublesome than baking bread." "James?" Lydia asked quietly. "Lived 3 days," Ethan said, his voice rough. "Sarah never recovered from the birth. Fever took her a week later." Lydia reached for his hand. "You never told me about the baby." "Some wounds you don't poke at unless you have to." "And now? Now I'm terrified and hopeful in equal measure." "That seems about right for impending parenthood," Mrs. Mills said practically. "But don't you worry. We've got Doc Morrison now, properly trained back east. Not like old Doc Hensley, who was drunk more often than sober." The frame of the house rose quickly with so many hands helping. It would be larger than the original cabin, with a proper parlor, a kitchen with a real stove that Mrs. Patterson had ordered from a catalog, and 3 bedrooms upstairs. "Planning for those 4 children already?" Reverend Mills teased. "Man's got to think ahead," Ethan replied, watching Lydia explain to the carpenter exactly how she wanted the windows placed to catch morning light. Sheriff Bradley rode up, dismounting with news from Helena. "Callan's trial is set for next month. Federal judge from Washington is coming to oversee it. They want you both to testify." "We'll be there," Ethan assured him. "How's he holding up in jail?" "Like you'd expect, demanding special treatment, threatening everyone, claiming he's being framed. His lawyers are trying every trick, but Sam Grant's got him dead to rights." "What about his ranch?" "Being held pending trial outcome. If he's convicted, it'll be auctioned to pay restitution to his victims." "Good riddance," Lydia said, then winced, hand going to her belly. Ethan was beside her instantly. "What's wrong?" "Nothing. The baby's just active today, been kicking up a storm since breakfast. You should rest." "Ethan Carver, if you tell me to rest one more time—" "You'll what?" he challenged, grinning. "I'll name this child Prudence if it's a girl and Mortimer if it's a boy." "You wouldn't dare. Try me." Sheriff Bradley laughed. "I'll leave you 2 to your domestic negotiations." "Oh, Ethan, almost forgot. Letter came for you at the office." He handed over an envelope with elegant handwriting. Ethan recognized it immediately, and his expression darkened. "Who's it from?" Lydia asked. "Catherine Morrison." "The woman from Helena? Your former fiancé?" "Unfortunately."
Are you going to read it? Ethan was tempted to throw it in the fire, but Lydia's steady gaze made him open it instead. He read quickly, his frown deepening. She wants to visit. Says she has important information about Callan that might help our case. That seems unlikely. That seems like Catherine. Always an angle, always a scheme. Tell her no. I intend to. But 3 days later, Catherine arrived anyway, stepping down from a fancy carriage in a traveling dress that probably cost more than most families saw in a year. She looked around at the construction site with barely concealed disdain. "Ethan," she called out sweetly, "I do hope you don't mind my dropping by. I was passing through and simply had to see how you were managing." "Passing through to where?" Lydia asked, appearing from behind the house frame, covered in sawdust, but somehow still managing to look regal. "The valley's not on the way to anywhere." Catherine's perfect smile faltered slightly. "To visit friends at the Morrison Ranch. Perhaps you've heard of it. One of the largest in the territory." "The one being investigated for railroad fraud?" Lydia asked innocently. "Yes, we've heard of it." The two women faced each other like gunfighters, Ethan caught in the middle. "Catherine, what do you really want?" he asked tiredly. "To help, actually. I do have information about Henry Callan that might interest you." "Such as?" "Such as the fact that he and my late husband were business partners in more than just land speculation. There are documents, correspondence that proves Callan was bribing officials, threatening families long before he came after you." "Why would you share this?" Lydia asked suspiciously. "Because Callan cheated my husband, and by extension, me. He owes me $20,000 that he claims doesn't exist. I want to see him destroyed." "The enemy of my enemy," Ethan murmured. "Precisely." "May we speak privately?" "Anything you have to say can be said in front of my wife." Catherine's jaw tightened. "Very well, I have letters signed by Callan ordering attacks on 3 families who refused to sell. I have bank records showing bribes to Judge Hoffman. I have everything you need to bury him. And in exchange? You testify that my husband was coerced into the railroad scheme, that he was another victim of Callan's manipulation." "But that's not true," Ethan said flatly. "Your husband was as corrupt as Callan. Truth is subjective, and my husband is dead, unable to defend himself or face justice. What harm in preserving his reputation?" "The harm is that it's a lie," Lydia said, "and we don't lie, not even for convenience." Catherine's composure finally cracked. "You self-righteous little seamstress, you think you've won, don't you? Married your frontier hero, carrying his child, building your little house. But women like you don't last out here. The frontier breaks refined women. I've seen it happen." "I'm not refined," Lydia replied calmly. "I'm a brothel seamstress's daughter who survived a blizzard, rebuilt after a fire, and faced down the man who tried to destroy us. What's going to break me that hasn't already tried?" "Childbirth," Catherine said viciously. "Ask Ethan about Sarah. Ask him how she screamed, how she bled, how she—" Ethan's hand cracked across Catherine's face, the slap echoing in the sudden silence. He'd never struck a woman before. But the words, the cruelty toward both Lydia and Sarah's memory, had moved him before thought could stop him. "Get out," he said, his voice deadly quiet. "Get out and never come back." Catherine held her reddening cheek, tears of fury in her eyes. "You'll regret this, both of you." "The only thing I regret is ever thinking you were worth loving," Ethan replied. She fled to her carriage, and they watched her leave in a cloud of dust and wounded pride. "You didn't have to hit her," Lydia said quietly. "Yes, I did." "I'm not afraid of childbirth, Ethan." "I know. But you are." He pulled her close, breathing in the scent of her hair. "Terrified. I'm stronger than Sarah was. I've been working my whole life. My body's used to hardship." "That's not how it works." "Then we'll have to have faith. Both of us." That night, as they lay in their temporary quarters in the barn, Lydia asked, "Did you love her, Catherine?" "I thought I did. But looking back, I think I loved the idea of her. She was beautiful, refined, everything a young man thinks he wants." "And Sarah?" "Sarah was real love, comfortable, steady, deep." "And me?" He turned to face her in the darkness.
Your fire. Consuming, transformative, impossible to ignore or resist. Fire burns. Fire also warms, illuminates, purifies. Fire is life. Sweet talker. Only with you. The weeks passed in a blur of construction and preparation. The house was nearly complete when they had to leave for Helena and Callan's trial. Doc Morrison insisted on accompanying them, worried about Lydia traveling so late in her pregnancy. I can deliver a baby in a hotel room if necessary, he assured them. Done it before. The trial was a sensation. The federal courthouse was packed, people coming from hundreds of miles away to watch the downfall of Henry Callan. He sat at the defendant's table like a deposed king, still maintaining his innocence despite overwhelming evidence. Ethan testified first, laying out the facts simply and clearly. The dead cattle, the burned cabin, the attempts on their lives. And you're certain Mr. Callan was behind these attacks? The prosecutor asked. Pete Hutchins worked for Callan. The men who ambushed us were Callan's employees. The pattern of attacks matched exactly what happened to other families who opposed him. Objection, Callan's lawyer called. Circumstantial. Sustained. But the damage was done. The jury could connect the dots. Lydia's testimony was more dramatic. She told her story from the beginning, the advertisement, the journey west, the abandonment in the blizzard. He looked at me like I was livestock, she said, her voice carrying clearly through the courtroom. Said I wasn't pretty enough, refined enough. Had his driver leave me to die because I didn't meet his standards. That's a lie, Callan burst out. She was hysterical, unstable. Mr. Callan, control yourself, the judge warned. And when I survived, Lydia continued, when I found love and happiness despite him, he couldn't bear it. He had to destroy what he couldn't possess. The other witnesses followed. The Jacobsons, the families who'd been driven off their land, even Pete Hutchins, who'd made a deal for a lighter sentence in exchange for his testimony. Mr. Callan ordered me to burn the Carver place, Hutchins admitted. Said to make sure the woman was inside if possible. The courtroom erupted. Even Callan's lawyer looked shocked. You were supposed to kill me? Lydia asked, her hand protective over her belly. Those were his words, ma'am. If she burns with it, so much the better. I didn't follow that part. I'm not a murderer. Just an arsonist, Ethan said coldly. The jury deliberated for less than an hour. Guilty on all counts. Callan was sentenced to 20 years in federal prison, his assets seized for restitution. As they led him away, he stopped near Ethan and Lydia. This isn't over, he hissed. Yes, it is, Lydia replied. You're nothing now, just a bitter old man who'll die in prison, forgotten and unmourned. The venom in Callan's eyes could have killed, but the marshals dragged him away before he could respond. Outside the courthouse, Sam Grant shook Ethan's hand. Justice served. Thanks to you. Thanks to your wife, more like. That woman's got more courage than most soldiers I've known. Don't I know it? They started home the next day, but only made it 20 miles before Lydia gasped, clutching her belly. What is it? Ethan asked, alarmed. I think it's time. But you're not due for another month. Tell that to the baby. Doc Morrison quickly assessed the situation. We need shelter. Now. They found an abandoned line shack, barely more than 4 walls and a roof, but it would have to do. Ethan carried Lydia inside while Doc Morrison prepared his supplies. This is not how I planned this, Lydia said through gritted teeth as another contraction hit. When has anything in our life gone according to plan? Ethan tried to joke, but his fear was obvious. Don't you dare look at me like I'm going to die, Ethan Carver. I'm not. You are. Stop it. I'm too stubborn to die. Doc Morrison was efficient and calm. Everything looks good. Baby's positioned right. This is just going to be work, Mrs. Carver. Hard work. It was. Hours of it. Lydia squeezed Ethan's hand hard enough to crack bones, screamed when the pain demanded it, and pushed with every ounce of strength she possessed. I can see the head, Doc Morrison announced. One more big push. Lydia bore down with a sound that was part scream, part war cry, and then, suddenly, a different cry filled the shack. Thin, angry, and absolutely beautiful. It's a girl, Doc Morrison said, cleaning the baby quickly and placing her on Lydia's chest. A perfectly healthy girl. Ethan stared at the tiny creature, red-faced and squalling, tiny fists waving in indignation at being evicted from her warm home. "She's perfect," he whispered. "She's loud," Lydia laughed, exhausted but radiant. "What should we name her?" "Sarah," Ethan suggested tentatively. "Sarah Hope Carver," Lydia agreed, "for the past and the future." "Sarah Hope," Ethan repeated, touching his daughter's impossibly small hand. Her fingers immediately gripped his, holding on with surprising strength. Strong like her mother. Stubborn like her father. They stayed in the line shack for 2 days, Doc Morrison insisting Lydia needed rest before traveling. On the second night, as Ethan held his daughter while Lydia slept, he whispered to the baby, "Your mama is the bravest person I know. She walked through a blizzard to find me. She stood up to evil men. She rebuilt after loss. And she brought you into this world with the same fierce determination she does everything." The baby made a small sound, maybe agreement, maybe gas. "You're going to grow up on the frontier, little one, but it's changing. By the time you're grown, there'll be schools and churches and proper towns. The railroad will bring civilization. But I hope you keep some of that frontier spirit, that courage to face the unknown, to stand for what's right, to love without reservation." "That's beautiful," Lydia said softly. "I thought you were asleep." "Hard to sleep when you're making speeches to our daughter. She's a good listener. Gets that from me." They finally made it home to find the house complete, the community having finished it in their absence. A cradle sat in the master bedroom, handmade by Old Man Thompson. The kitchen was stocked with preserved foods. Everything was ready for their new life. "Welcome home, Sarah Hope," Lydia said, carrying the baby over the threshold. The first weeks were a blur of feedings and diapers and precious little sleep, but also moments of pure joy. Sarah's first smile, her fascination with Blue, who appointed himself her guardian, the way she settled instantly when Ethan sang to her. "You never told me you could sing," Lydia said one evening, watching him rock Sarah to sleep. "Not something that comes up in everyday conversation. What else don't I know about you? Give me 40 years or so and maybe you'll find out everything." "Only 40. 50 then." "Better." They were settling into routine when unexpected visitors arrived. A small wagon train, 5 families, stopped at their property. "We heard about this valley," the lead man said. "Heard it was good land, fair people. We're looking to settle, if there's room." "There's room," Ethan said, remembering his own arrival years ago. "The Callan Ranch is being divided up for sale. Good land, fair prices." "And no tyrants?" the man asked. "No tyrants," Lydia confirmed, Sarah in her arms. "Just neighbors." The families settled, then more came. Within 6 months, the valley's population had doubled. A school was being built. The railroad announced definite plans to come through the following year. "Progress," Ethan said, watching the school raising from their porch. "Good progress or bad?" "Both, probably, but inevitable either way. Sarah will have proper schooling, maybe even college someday." "College? She's not even crawling yet. I'm planning ahead, like you with those extra bedrooms." "About those bedrooms," Lydia smiled. "Already? Sarah's only 6 months old. Practice makes perfect." "Ethan Carver." "What? You said 4 children. At least I get some recovery time between them." "Of course. I'm not unreasonable. Aren't you?" He pulled her close, Sarah babbling between them. "Have I been unreasonable so far?" "No," she admitted. "You've been wonderful. Patient, kind, supportive." "Don't sound so surprised." "I'm not. I knew who you were from that first night, when you gave up your warmth to save a stranger." "Not a stranger. My future wife." "You didn't know that then." "Didn't I? Some part of me knew, I think. Knew you were going to change everything. For better or worse? Better? Infinitely better." That evening, they sat on their completed porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold. Sarah slept in Ethan's arms, making small, contented sounds. Blue lay at their feet, ever watchful. The house stood strong around them, built on stone foundations and community support. "I got a letter today," Lydia said. "From Philadelphia." Ethan tensed. "Oh?"
My aunt, my mother's sister, she heard about the trial, about everything. She wants to visit. How do you feel about that? Nervous, happy, scared. She's the only family I have left besides you and Sarah. Then she's welcome. Just like that? Family's important, even complicated family. What if she judges our life here, finds it too rough? Then she doesn't have to stay, but she should have the chance to know you, know Sarah. You're a good man, Ethan Carver. I'm a man who learned from loss not to take family for granted. A few days later, while Ethan was working on fencing for the expanded garden Lydia wanted, riders approached. His hand went automatically to his gun, old habits dying hard. But it was Marshal Grant, accompanied by two men in city suits. "Ethan," Sam greeted him, "these gentlemen are from the Northern Pacific Railroad. They have a proposition." The older suit, introducing himself as Mr. Pemberton, got straight to the point. "We're looking for a local representative, someone to help coordinate land purchases, smooth relations with the community as we build through. Someone trusted. And you're asking me? Your name came up repeatedly. You stood up to Callan, have the respect of the valley. We need someone incorruptible. I'm a rancher, not a businessman." "We're not looking for a businessman. We're looking for an honest man." Ethan considered it. "I'd need to discuss it with my wife." "Of course. The position would pay well. Very well. Enough to ensure your family's comfort for generations." After they left, Ethan found Lydia teaching Sarah to clap, both of them laughing at the baby's uncoordinated attempts. "The railroad wants to hire me," he said without preamble. "To do what?" He explained, watching her face carefully. "It would mean dealing with people more," she pointed out. "Less hiding out here with just us and the cattle." "I know." "It would mean being part of the valley's transformation, for better or worse." "I know that too." "And it would secure Sarah's future, her education, her opportunities." "Yes." "Then you should do it." "Just like that?" "Ethan, you're not meant to hide forever. You have too much to offer. The valley needs leaders, good ones, especially now. We'd be more visible, more vulnerable to anyone with grudges. We're already visible. Might as well be visible and prosperous." He sat beside her, taking Sarah when she reached for him. "When did you become so wise?" "Somewhere between the blizzard and the childbirth, I think." "Those were educational experiences." "The most." He accepted the railroad position, and their life shifted again. Meetings in town, correspondence with Helena, negotiations with landowners. But always he came home to Lydia and Sarah, to the house they'd built, and the life they'd carved out of adversity. One evening, as summer turned to fall, they hosted a dinner for the new families in the valley. Their house was full of laughter and conversation, children playing, adults discussing the future. "You did this," Mrs. Patterson told Lydia. "You and Ethan. Showed us we could stand up, fight back, build something better." "We all did it," Lydia protested. "But you started it. That courage is contagious, just like the marshal said." Later, after the guests had gone and Sarah was asleep, Ethan and Lydia stood on their porch, looking out at the valley dotted with new homes and lights. "Any regrets?" he asked. "About what?" "Not staying in Philadelphia. Not finding an easier life." "This is easier," she said. "Oh, the work's harder. The dangers are real. But the life itself. Having purpose, community, love, that's the easiest thing in the world. Even after everything, especially after everything. We were tested and survived. We know who we are, what we can endure. How many people can say that?" "Catherine was wrong," Ethan said suddenly. "The frontier doesn't break refined women. It reveals who they really are. And you, Lydia Carver, are steel wrapped in silk. Poetic. You inspire poetry. Among other things?" "Many other things." They were interrupted by Sarah's cry from inside. Lydia went to tend her while Ethan remained on the porch, thinking about the strange paths life took. A year ago he'd been a hermit, nursing old wounds and hiding from life. Now he had a wife who challenged and supported him in equal measure, a daughter who owned his heart completely,
and a future bright with possibility. The sound of hoofbeats drew his attention. A lone rider approached, moving fast. Ethan tensed, then relaxed as he recognized young James Patterson. "Mr. Carver! Mr. Carver! News from Helena." "What is it, boy?" "Callan's dead. Killed trying to escape prison. Tried to break out with 2 other men. Guards shot him down." Ethan felt nothing. No satisfaction, no relief, just a distant acknowledgement that a chapter was closed. "Thank you for telling me, James." After the boy left, Ethan went inside to find Lydia nursing Sarah. "Callan's dead," he said simply. She looked up at him, searching his face. "How do you feel?" "Like it doesn't matter. He was already gone from our lives. This just makes it official." "No loose ends now." "No loose ends." Sarah finished nursing and reached for Ethan. He took her, marveling as always at her perfect tiny features, the way she looked at him with absolute trust. "She'll never know that fear," Lydia said. "Never have to look over her shoulder, wondering when the next threat will come. No, she'll have new challenges. The railroad will bring change, not all of it good. The frontier's dying, civilization's coming. But she'll be ready for it. We'll make sure of that." "Yes, we will." As Ethan rocked his daughter to sleep, humming the lullaby his own mother had sung to him, he thought about the future stretching ahead. There would be more children, he hoped. The house would ring with laughter and arguments and life. The valley would grow, transform, become something neither wild nor tame, but uniquely itself. And at the center of it all would be this family, forged in blizzard and fire, tested by violence and loss, and made stronger by love that refused to yield. "Thank you," he whispered, though whether to God, fate, or the storm that had brought Lydia to his door, he couldn't say. From her chair, Lydia smiled, understanding without words. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new joys, new sorrows. But tonight, in the house they'd built on the ashes of the old, with their daughter safe between them and their future spreading out like a promise, tonight was perfect. The frontier might be dying, but their frontier, the wild, dangerous, beautiful country of their joined hearts, would live forever in the children they raised, the community they built, and the love that had conquered every obstacle. Outside, the first snow of the season began to fall, gentle and clean, covering the valley in pristine white. But inside the Carver home, warmth and light held sway, a beacon in the darkness, a testament to the power of love to transform even the harshest landscape into home. The years that followed Callan's death passed with the steady rhythm of seasons and growth. Sarah learned to walk in the same room where Lydia had first recovered from the blizzard, her tiny feet finding purchase on floors that had been rebuilt from ashes. By her second birthday, she was racing through the house with Blue struggling to keep up, the old dog determined to guard his small charge despite his aging joints. Lydia's prediction proved true sooner than expected. Their son, James Samuel Carver, arrived on a calm spring morning with far less drama than his sister's birth. Doc Morrison, who'd become a regular visitor and friend, declared it one of the easiest deliveries he'd attended. "This one's going to be the quiet type," he predicted, watching the baby sleep peacefully in Lydia's arms. "Mark my words." He was wrong. James had his mother's fierce spirit and his father's stubborn streak, a combination that would challenge and delight them in equal measure. The railroad arrived as promised, bringing with it a tide of change that transformed the valley beyond recognition. What had been a scattered collection of ranches and farms became a proper town, with streets and shops and even a small hotel that catered to travelers passing through. Ethan's position with the railroad company proved both blessing and burden. The pay was generous, allowing them to expand their ranch and ensure their children would have opportunities he'd never dreamed of. But it also meant navigating the delicate balance between progress and preservation, between the needs of newcomers and the rights of those who'd carved out lives here when the valley was still wild. "Another offer on the Patterson place," Ethan told Lydia one evening, setting aside a stack of correspondence. "Eastern Syndicate wants to buy up the whole north section for cattle operations. Old man Patterson won't sell. That land's been in his family for 20 years. They're offering 5 times what it's worth. Some things aren't for sale. Lydia looked out the window to where Sarah was helping James toddle through the garden, both children covered in dirt and completely happy. We'd know that better than most. A knock at the door interrupted them. It was Mrs. Patterson from the boarding house, her face creased with worry. "It's my husband," she said without preamble. "Had another visit from those railroad investors. They're getting pushy, making threats." "What kind of threats?" Ethan asked, already reaching for his coat. "The kind that sound like Callan all over again, talking about accidents, about how dangerous ranching can be." Ethan and Lydia exchanged glances. They'd thought that chapter was closed, but greed and corruption weren't limited to one man.
"I'll handle it," Ethan said. "We'll handle it," Lydia corrected. "Mrs. Patterson, can you watch the children?" "Of course, but we've dealt with bullies before. These ones just wear fancier suits." They found Mr. Patterson at his ranch, facing down 3 men in city clothes. Unlike Callan's thugs, these men carried briefcases instead of guns, but their manner was equally menacing. "Ah, Mr. Carver," the lead man said smoothly. "How fortuitous. Perhaps you can explain to Mr. Patterson the benefits of accepting our generous offer. The only thing I'll explain is that harassment is still illegal, whether you're wearing work clothes or a 3-piece suit." "Harassment? We're simply conducting business negotiations." "Is that what you call threatening a man on his own property?" The man's smile was cold. "I think you'll find we have significant influence with the railroad company. Your position, for instance, could be easily terminated." "Try it," Ethan said evenly. "I've got enough saved to last year's and plenty of witnesses to your threats, including my wife, who, as you might have heard, has a talent for dealing with men who overreach." Lydia stepped forward, and something in her expression made the men step back. "Gentlemen, let me explain something. This valley has already had one war over land rights. We won. We'll win again if necessary. The difference is, this time we know what we're doing from the start." "You can't fight progress, Mrs. Carver." "I'm not fighting progress. I'm fighting corruption. There's a difference, though men like you often can't see it." The lead man studied them for a moment. "You're making a mistake. We have resources you can't imagine, and we have something you don't." Old man Patterson spoke up, finding his courage. "We have each other. Every rancher, every farmer, every shopkeeper in this valley. You try to force any of us out, you'll face all of us. That's touching, but solidarity doesn't pay bills or stop accidents." The sound of approaching horses interrupted him. Sheriff Bradley appeared with a half-dozen deputized men, all armed, all wearing determined expressions. "Got your message, Ethan," Bradley said. "These gentlemen causing trouble?" "Just leaving, actually," Ethan replied. "Weren't you gentlemen?" The investors looked around at the assembled force and apparently decided discretion was the better part of valor. "This isn't over," the lead man said as they retreated to their carriage. "It never is," Lydia replied. "But we'll be ready." After they left, Old Man Patterson shook Ethan's hand gratefully. "Thank you, both of you. I was about ready to give in." "Don't ever give in to bullies," Sarah's small voice piped up. She'd escaped Mrs. Patterson's watch and stood beside her mother, tiny fists clenched. "Mama says bullies are just scared people trying to make others scared too." "Out of the mouths of babes," Bradley chuckled. "Your daughter's going to be a force to reckon with, Ethan." "She already is," Ethan replied, scooping Sarah up. "Too much like her mother for anyone's good." "I heard that," Lydia said. "You were meant to." That evening, they called a town meeting. The church was packed, every seat filled, people standing along the walls. Word of the confrontation had spread quickly. "We need to be organized," Ethan addressed the crowd. "These investors aren't going away. They see opportunity here, and they're not wrong. This valley is valuable. The question is whether we let them take it from us or whether we control our own destiny." "What are you proposing?" Reverend Mills asked. "A collective agreement. We support each other, refuse to sell to outsiders without community approval. Make it clear that buying one ranch means dealing with all of us." "That's restraint of trade," someone called out. "They could sue." "Let them," Lydia stood up. "We have the right to choose who we do business with. And if they want to make it legal, we have our own resources now. The railroad job has been good to us, and Ethan and I are prepared to help finance any legal defense needed." "You do that?"
Mrs. Watson asked. This valley gave us a home when we had nothing but ashes. It's only right we give back. The vote was unanimous. The Valley Protective Association was formed that night, with Ethan as president and Lydia as secretary. Within a week, they had a charter, a bank account funded by contributions from every family, and a lawyer from Helena on retainer. The investors tried various tactics over the following months. They attempted to bribe officials, spread rumors about water rights, even tried to seduce away the valley's young men with promises of jobs in the city. Each attempt was met with unified resistance. They're not used to this, Sam Grant observed during one of his visits. He'd retired from marshalling and bought a small ranch nearby, claiming he liked the neighborhood. Men like that expect money to solve everything. Money's just a tool, Ethan replied. Community is power. Spoken like a man who's learned some hard lessons. The best teacher I ever had came knocking during a blizzard. As autumn approached, bringing with it Sarah's 4th birthday and James's 2nd, another knock came to their door. But this visitor was expected, Lydia's Aunt Margaret, finally making the journey from Philadelphia. She was a small woman, bird-like, with Lydia's dark hair gone silver and the same intelligent eyes. She stood on their porch, taking in the view of mountains and grassland with an unreadable expression. Aunt Margaret, Lydia said nervously. Welcome. My dear girl, Margaret replied, then pulled Lydia into a fierce embrace. I thought I'd lost you forever. They spent the evening catching up, years of separation melting away as Margaret charmed the children and even won over Blue, who rarely warmed to strangers anymore. Your mother would be proud, Margaret told Lydia as they watched Ethan teaching Sarah to rope a fence post. You've built something remarkable here. It wasn't easy. The best things never are. Margaret paused. I heard about what happened. The fire, the trial. It was in the Philadelphia papers. I'm sure they made it sound scandalous. They made it sound heroic. Local woman triumphs over frontier tyranny. You're something of a legend back east. Lydia laughed. I'm just a mother trying to raise her children and keep her husband from taking on too many fights. Don't diminish what you've accomplished. You faced down evil and won. How many can say that? Margaret stayed for a month and her presence brought unexpected benefits. She had connections in Philadelphia society, women who'd married into railroad money. Through careful correspondence, she managed to discover who was behind the investment syndicate threatening the valley. Theodore Morrison, she announced at dinner one evening. Catherine Morrison's brother-in-law. Ethan set down his fork carefully. Catherine's involved in this? Indirectly. Theodore inherited his brother's estate and apparently his grudges. He sees taking this valley as both a business opportunity and a chance for revenge. The woman can't let go, Lydia said with disgust. Hell hath no fury, Margaret quoted. We need to end this, Ethan said, permanently. The solution came from an unexpected source. Sam Grant had been doing his own investigation and discovered that Theodore Morrison had been embezzling from the railroad company, using his position to inside trade on land deals. It's enough to bring federal charges, Sam explained, but we need someone inside the company to confirm it. I can do that, Ethan said. I have access to the records. It's dangerous. If Morrison realizes what you're doing, then we'd better be quick about it. The investigation took 3 weeks. 3 weeks of careful document review, late-night meetings with federal prosecutors, and constant vigilance against Morrison's spies. Lydia insisted on being involved, her sharp eye for detail catching discrepancies Ethan might have missed. You should have been a detective, Sam told her admiringly after she uncovered a particularly damning piece of evidence. I'm a mother of 2 small children. That requires all the detective skills anyone could need. The arrest came on a crisp October morning. Theodore Morrison and 6 co-conspirators were taken into custody, charged with fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. The investment syndicate collapsed overnight. Catherine arrived 2 days later, dressed in mourning black despite no one having died, demanding to speak with Ethan. You destroyed him, she accused. Theodore's lost everything. Theodore destroyed himself, Ethan replied calmly. Greed does that. This is your revenge for my rejecting you all those years ago. Catherine, I haven't thought about you in years. This was about protecting our home, nothing more. You always were insufferably noble. She turned to Lydia. You're welcome to him. A man that principled must be exhausting to live with. Actually, Lydia replied, it's rather refreshing. You should try it sometime. Catherine left in a fury, and they never saw her again. Years later, they heard she'd married a banker in San Francisco and was reportedly miserable but wealthy. With the threat removed, the valley settled into a period of unprecedented growth and prosperity. The school expanded, adding a second teacher. A newspaper started publication. The hotel added a restaurant that drew travelers from Helena. Ethan's work with the railroad evolved from land negotiation to community development. He helped establish fair rates for local farmers shipping their goods, negotiated contracts that benefited both the company and the valley residents. You've become a politician, Lydia teased him one evening as he reviewed proposals for a new town hall. God forbid. It's not an insult. You're doing what politicians should do, serving your community. I'm just trying to keep the peace. Same thing, different words. Their third child arrived the following spring, another daughter they named Margaret after Lydia's aunt, who'd returned to Philadelphia but maintained a steady correspondence. Maggie, as she quickly became known, had Ethan's green eyes and Lydia's determined chin. 3 children, Ethan marveled, holding the baby while Sarah and James played at his feet. We're officially outnumbered. We were outnumbered the moment Sarah learned to talk, Lydia replied. That child could argue the sun into setting early. Wonder where she gets that from. Her father, obviously. Obviously. Life settled into a rhythm of controlled chaos. Mornings began before dawn with chores and breakfast, days filled with work and education, evenings with family dinners that grew increasingly lively as the children developed their own opinions about everything. Sarah showed an early aptitude for mathematics, often helping Ethan with his railroad accounts. James preferred the ranch work, following Ethan around with a determination that reminded everyone of his mother. Maggie, even as a toddler, showed signs of being the diplomat, somehow managing to settle arguments between her older siblings with a smile and babbled words no one could understand but everyone accepted. We're building something good here, Lydia said one evening, standing on the porch they'd expanded to accommodate their growing family's needs. The valley spread before them, dotted with farms and homes, the railroad tracks gleaming in the setting sun like a river of steel. We are, Ethan agreed, pulling her close, though I never imagined it would look like this. What did you imagine? Honestly, after Sarah died, I didn't imagine anything, just existing, day by day, until I didn't have to anymore. And now I imagine grandchildren playing in this yard, our children grown and making their own marks on the world. You and me, old and gray, still arguing about who's more stubborn. That's not an argument. I'm definitely more stubborn. See, that stubborn streak right there proves my point. She laughed, the sound carrying across the valley. It was a sound that had become familiar over the years, as much a part of the landscape as the mountains themselves. A horse approached, rider moving fast. They tensed from old habit, then relaxed as they recognized young James Patterson, now a man of 20 and deputy sheriff under Bradley. Mr. and Mrs. Carver, he called out, dismounting quickly. Sheriff needs you in town. There's been an incident. They exchanged glances. What kind of incident? Ethan asked. Train robbery about 10 miles east. They got away with the railroad payroll, but one of the robbers was captured. He's asking for you specifically, Mr. Carver. Why me? Says he has information you need to hear about your past. They rode to town quickly, leaving the children with Mrs. Patterson, who'd become their regular caretaker despite her advancing age. The jail was surrounded by curious townspeople, all eager for news about the robbery. Inside, they found a man Ethan didn't recognize, young, maybe 25, with the hard look of someone who'd made bad choices early and often. You Ethan Carver? The man asked. I am. My name's William Hensley. My father was Dr. Hensley. Ethan remembered the old drunk doctor who'd failed to save Sarah and their baby. He's been dead for years. I know, drank himself to death from guilt, or so my mother said. The young man's bitter laugh echoed in the small cell. Guilt over what he did to your wife. What are you talking about? He was paid to let her die. Paid to be too drunk to help when her time came. The words hit like physical blows. Lydia grabbed Ethan's arm, whether to support him or hold him back, he wasn't sure. Paid by who? Ethan's voice was deadly quiet. Henry Callan. He wanted your land even then, figured a grieving widower would be easier to buy out than a family man. You're lying. Got no reason to lie now. I'm looking at 20 years for this robbery. Least I can do is clear my old man's conscience, even if he's too dead to appreciate it. Why should we believe you? Lydia asked. Because I've got proof. My father wrote it all down, hid it in our old house. Confession, details, even the payment record. Callan paid him $500 to be unavailable when Mrs. Carver went into labor. Ethan stood very still, processing this information. Sarah hadn't just died. She'd been murdered. Their child had been murdered by a man who is now dead himself, beyond justice's reach. Ethan, Lydia said softly, her hand on his back. Breathe. He hadn't realized he'd stopped. The rage that filled him was cold and absolute, but there was nowhere to direct it. Callan was dead. Doc Hensley was dead. There was no one left to punish. Where's this proof? He asked, finally. William Hensley gave them directions to his father's old cabin, abandoned for years on the outskirts of town. They found the documents where he'd said they'd be, hidden beneath loose floorboards. The confession was rambling, written by a man drowning in alcohol and guilt, but the facts were clear. I could have saved her, Ethan said, holding the yellowed pages with shaking hands. If I'd known. If I'd gotten her to Helena, to a real doctor. You couldn't have known, Lydia interrupted firmly. This isn't your guilt to carry. Isn't it? I should have suspected something, should have questioned why the doctor was so drunk that night. You were watching your wife die. No one thinks clearly in those moments. They sat in the ruins of the old cabin, surrounded by the decay of years and secrets. Finally, Ethan stood, walking outside to where a rusty old stove sat abandoned. He fed the documents into it one by one, then lit them on fire. Ethan, that's evidence. Evidence of what? Everyone involved is dead. There's no justice to be had here. Only more pain. But people should know. Why? So they can pity me more? So Sarah's memory becomes about her murder instead of her life? He watched the papers burn to ash. Some truths don't need to be preserved. They rode home in silence, each lost in thought. But as they approached their ranch, seeing their children playing in the yard, Sarah bossing James around while Maggie toddled after Blue, Ethan felt something shift in his chest. They lived, he said suddenly. What? Sarah and our first child. They lived in bringing me to the place where I could have this. If she hadn't died, I never would have built that cabin. You never would have found it in the storm. These children wouldn't exist. The valley might still be under Callan's thumb. That's a heavy burden of meaning to place on tragedy. Or maybe it's the only meaning that makes tragedy bearable. Lydia reached over, taking his hand. Sarah would be glad you found happiness again. I think she would. I hope she would. I know she would. Any woman who loved you would want you to be loved again. That night, after the children were asleep, Ethan visited Sarah's grave for the first time in over a year. The headstone was weathered but still readable. Sarah Matthews Carver, beloved wife, 1842 to 1869. I know the truth now, he said quietly, about what happened. And I'm choosing to let it go. You deserve to rest in peace, not be fuel for more anger. The wind rustled through the grass, and for a moment he could almost hear her voice, gentle and approving. Thank you, he continued, for the time we had. For teaching me to love. For preparing me to love again. Watch over us if you can. Watch over all of us. He placed wildflowers on the grave, the same kind Lydia had carried at their wedding, then walked back to the house where his living family waited. The years that followed were not without challenges. The country went through economic panics that tested everyone's resolve. Drought threatened the valley's prosperity. Sarah, at 16, fell in love with a traveling musician who promised her adventure and broke her heart when he left without a word. I hate men, she declared dramatically, throwing herself onto the parlor sofa. All of them? Ethan asked mildly. Except you and James, and maybe Mr. Grant, but all the rest. That seems reasonable, Lydia said, hiding a smile. Though you might want to reconsider when you meet the new teacher they've hired for the advanced mathematics class. Sarah perked up slightly. Is he handsome? She is quite accomplished, having graduated from Radcliffe. A woman mathematics teacher? Sarah sat up fully. Really? Really? Arrives next month. Sarah's heartbreak was forgotten in her excitement about learning from a woman who'd achieved what she dreamed of, higher education in a field dominated by men. James, now 18, had taken over much of the ranch work, showing an aptitude for cattle breeding that surprised everyone. Boy's got a gift, Old Man Thompson observed, knows bloodlines like some folks know their Bible. He gets it from his mother, Ethan said. She's the one who can organize anything. I organize, Lydia protested. I don't breed cattle. Same principle, seeing patterns, understanding what works with what. You're saying I treat our children like livestock. I'm saying you have a gift for creating order from chaos. James inherited it. Nice save. Maggie at 14 showed signs of becoming the family peacemaker, but with steel underneath the silk. When a group of older boys cornered her after school, making inappropriate comments, she broke the ringleader's nose and calmly walked home. You broke his nose? Ethan asked, torn between pride and concern. He wouldn't stop when I asked nicely. Mother always says to use the minimum force necessary to resolve a situation. A broken nose seemed minimum given the circumstances. What exactly were the circumstances? Lydia asked. Maggie's cheeks reddened. He said things about what he wanted to do, what I should let him do because his father owns the bank. What's his name? Ethan asked quietly. No, Daddy. I handled it. If you get involved, people will say I can't fight my own battles, and I can. You and Mother taught me that. She was right, though it took all Ethan's restraint not to visit the boy's father anyway. But Maggie had made her point effectively. The boy never bothered her or any other girl again, and Maggie gained a reputation as someone not to be trifled with. Our children are terrifying, Ethan told Lydia one evening. They're magnificent, she corrected. Terrifying and magnificent. Like their mother. Like both their parents. You're pretty terrifying yourself when you need to be. Less so these days. I'm getting old. You're 48. That's not old. Tell that to my knees when it rains. Your knees are fine. I checked thoroughly last night. Lydia Carver. What? The children are asleep. I'm allowed to appreciate my husband. 23 years had passed since that desperate knock on his door, and still she could make him blush like a schoolboy. The passion between them had evolved from desperate fire to steady warmth, but it had never faded. The letter arrived on a Tuesday, delivered by special courier from Helena. The governor himself was writing to inform Ethan that he was being considered for a territorial judgeship. Judge Carver, Lydia tried out the title. It has a nice ring to it. It has a pompous ring to it. You'd be fair, honest. The territory needs judges like that. I'm not a lawyer. Neither are half the judges in Montana. You have something better, integrity and the respect of the community. It would mean traveling, being away from home. The children are nearly grown. Sarah's leaving for college next year. James is practically running the ranch already, and Maggie's more independent every day. What about you? What about me? Would you want to be a judge's wife? All that society nonsense in Helena? Lydia laughed. Ethan Carver, after all these years, you still don't understand. I don't care if you're a rancher, a railroad representative, or a judge. I care that you're you, although, she added thoughtfully, being able to influence territorial law regarding women's rights would be interesting. Of course, that's where your mind goes. Where else should it go? Sarah deserves a world where she can use that brilliant mathematical mind without fighting for every opportunity. Maggie deserves to walk down the street without harassment. All our daughters do. When you put it like that, how can I refuse? He accepted the position, and their life shifted once again. The travel was difficult, but the work was rewarding. Ethan found himself in a position to shape the territory's future, to ensure that the law protected the vulnerable as well as the powerful. His first major case involved a woman seeking divorce from an abusive husband, a controversial stance in 1892. Ethan not only granted the divorce, but awarded her full custody of the children and half the marital assets. "You'll catch hell for that decision," Sam warned him. "Let them bring it." The decision stood, setting a precedent that would be cited for decades. Sarah graduated from college with highest honors, the first woman from their valley to do so. She returned home briefly before heading to Chicago to work for a progressive reform organization. "I'm going to change the world, Daddy," she told him at the train station. "I believe you will. You and Mother did it here. Now it's my turn to do it out there." James married Alice Bradley, the sheriff's daughter, in a ceremony that brought the whole valley together. They built their own house on the ranch property, close enough to help but far enough for independence. Maggie surprised everyone by announcing she wanted to study medicine. "Women doctors are still rare," Ethan warned her. "So were women mathematics teachers until they weren't." "Someone has to be first. Or second or third," Lydia added. "The point is to keep pushing until it's normal." "Exactly." Maggie kissed both her parents. "You taught me to fight for what I want. This is what I want." The house that had once seemed too large for their growing family now felt too empty with the children mostly gone. But it also gave Ethan and Lydia time to rediscover each other, to be a couple instead of just parents. "We did it," Lydia said one evening, standing in Sarah's old room, now converted to a library. "We raised them, launched them into the world. We did. Any regrets?" "Only one." "What's that?" "That we didn't have those 4 children you wanted. 3 was perfect. Any more, and we might have gone mad." "We might have gone mad anyway." "True. But at least we went mad together." A telegram arrived the next morning that changed everything. It was from Sarah in Chicago. "Coming home. Bringing someone. Important news. Don't worry. All good." She arrived a week later with a young man in tow, tall and earnest-looking with intelligent eyes and ink-stained fingers. "This is David," she announced. "He's a journalist. Also my husband." The silence that followed could have been measured in heartbeats. "Surprise," Sarah added weakly. "You got married without us?" Lydia asked, her voice carefully neutral. "It was spontaneous. We were at City Hall for a story, and there was a judge, and we just did it." "Sarah Hope Carver," Ethan began. "Morrison. Sarah Hope Morrison now." "You took his name?" Lydia asked, surprised. Sarah had always been vocally opposed to the tradition. "We hyphenated." Morrison Carver. The clerk just didn't write it all down. David stepped forward nervously. "Mr. and Mrs. Carver, I know this isn't how you wanted to meet me. Sarah's told me so much about you both. I promise I'll take good care of her." "You'd better," James said from the doorway, having arrived for Sunday dinner. "I've got a lot of land to hide a body on." "James!" Alice scolded, though she was fighting a smile. The tension broke as Maggie arrived, took one look at the situation and said, "So Sarah pulled a mom and dad. Quick marriage to someone you barely know. At least yours wasn't during a blizzard." "We knew each other for 8 months," Sarah protested. "Your mother and I knew each other for 5 days, Ethan admitted. 4 days, Lydia corrected. "The first day I was unconscious, so it doesn't count." David relaxed slightly. "Sarah said you had an unusual courtship." "That's one way to put it," Ethan said, then extended his hand. "Welcome to the family, David. Fair warning, we're all a little crazy." "A little?" Maggie laughed. "Daddy, we're completely mad." "But it's the good kind of mad." Dinner that night was chaos. Everyone talking at once, stories being shared, David being gently interrogated about his prospects and intentions. It reminded Ethan of all the dinners they'd shared when the children were young, the table full of noise and life and love. "I'm pregnant," Sarah announced over dessert, causing another sudden silence. "Sarah!" Lydia exclaimed. "That's actually why we got married so quickly." "We found out, and David insisted on doing the right thing immediately." "I would have married her anyway," David said quickly. The baby just moved up the timeline. Ethan looked at his daughter, brilliant and impulsive, so much like her mother. "Are you happy?" "Incredibly happy, Daddy. I know it's not conventional,
But when has our family ever been conventional? Never, Lydia said, rising to embrace her daughter.
And thank God for that. Later that evening, after the younger generation had dispersed to their homes, Ethan and Lydia sat on their porch, watching the stars emerge. Grandparents, Ethan said, testing out the word. We're going to be grandparents. Several times over, if our children have anything to say about it. The cycle continues, but better each time. Sarah won't have to hide her pregnancy until after the wedding. Her daughter, or son, will grow up in a world with more possibilities. Because of fighters like you. Like us. You've done your share of fighting for what's right. They sat in comfortable silence, the valley spread before them, lights from the town twinkling like earthbound stars. The ranch had grown to encompass nearly 1,000 acres. The town had a proper main street, telegraph office, and even a small hospital that Doc Morrison ran with 2 younger doctors he'd trained. Do you ever think about that night? Lydia asked. The blizzard? Sometimes. What would have happened if I'd turned back? Found another house? Made it to town? Then I'd have died, Ethan said simply. Maybe not that night, but soon. I was dying before you arrived, just doing it slowly. And I'd have died in truth, frozen in a drift somewhere, or worse, survived and ended up in a situation I couldn't escape. We saved each other. We did. A wolf howled in the distance, answered by another. The sound that once meant danger now seemed almost musical, a reminder that wildness still existed despite all the civilization they'd brought to the valley. I have something to tell you, Lydia said suddenly. Oh. Remember when I said I thought 3 children was perfect? Yes? I may have been premature in that assessment. Ethan turned to stare at her. Lydia, you're not 43 years old and pregnant. Doc Morrison confirmed it yesterday. But how? Really, Ethan? After 3 children, you need me to explain how? I mean, at our age? Apparently we're not as old as we thought. A baby, now, with Sarah having a baby too. I know, it's absurd. It's wonderful. He pulled her close, laughing against her hair. It's absolutely wonderful and completely insane. Like everything else in our life. Exactly like everything else. They told the children the next day, causing an uproar of reactions from delight to disbelief. Mother, you can't be pregnant. Your mother, Maggie protested. Mothers can't have babies? Lydia asked archly. Not at your age. 43 is not ancient, despite what you children seem to think. This is wonderful, Sarah said, hand on her own still flat stomach. Our children will grow up together, more like siblings than cousins. The house is going to be chaos, James warned. Babies everywhere. The house has always been chaos, Ethan pointed out. We're just experienced at it now. The pregnancy was harder than Lydia's others, her body protesting what it saw as an unreasonable demand at an unreasonable age. But she persevered with her characteristic determination, working until the day she went into labor. Thomas Ethan Carver arrived during a spring thunderstorm, as if making sure his entrance was as dramatic as his parents' meeting. He was healthy and loud and perfect, with Ethan's green eyes and Lydia's dark hair. 4 children, Ethan said, holding his youngest son while his oldest daughter nursed her own newborn daughter in the same room. We got your 4 children after all. Only took us 24 years, Lydia replied, exhausted but radiant. Worth the wait. Life settled into a new rhythm. Ethan reduced his judicial travels to spend more time at home. The house filled once again with the sounds of children, though now it was grandchildren mixed with their own surprising late blessing. Thomas grew up surrounded by love and chaos, equally spoiled by his much older siblings and cousins. He showed early signs of his father's contemplative nature and his mother's fierce spirit, a combination that would serve him well in the changing world he was born into. The 20th century arrived with fanfare and uncertainty. The valley had become a proper town, with electric lights beginning to replace gas lamps. Automobiles appeared, though horses remained the primary transportation. Everything's changing so fast, Mrs. Patterson observed during one of her visits. She was in her 70s now, but still sharp. Change is the only constant, Lydia replied, watching Thomas play with Sarah's daughter Elizabeth. "The trick is making sure it's change for the better. You two certainly brought enough change to this valley." "We just survived a blizzard," Ethan said. "Everything else followed from that." "Don't be modest. You stood up when standing up mattered. You showed us all what courage looked like." That evening, as Ethan and Lydia prepared for bed in the room where she'd first recovered all those years ago, she asked, "Do you think we've done enough?" "Enough for what?" "To make things better. To leave the world improved. Look at our children. Sarah's fighting for women's suffrage in Chicago. James is pioneering sustainable ranching practices. Maggie's about to become one of the first woman doctors in Montana. And Thomas, who knows what Thomas will become, but with us as examples, it'll be something worthwhile." "That's not an answer." "Then here's an answer. We took a valley ruled by fear and made it a community built on mutual support. We raised children who question injustice and fight for what's right. We've loved each other through blizzards and fires and births and deaths. If that's not enough, nothing ever will be." "When did you become so philosophical?" "Somewhere between the first gray hair and the fourth child." "You were philosophical before you went gray." "Then somewhere between meeting you and now." She kissed him, still able to make his heart race after all these years. "I love you, Ethan Carver." "And I love you, Lydia Carver." Outside, snow began to fall, gentle and peaceful, nothing like the blizzard that had brought them together. But it served as a reminder of how far they'd come, how much they'd built from that desperate beginning. The letter arrived the next morning, delivered by automobile, still a novelty that made Thomas shriek with excitement. It was from the territorial governor, informing Ethan that he was being considered for the first state Supreme Court, as Montana was about to achieve statehood. "State Supreme Court," Lydia read aloud. "That's quite an honor. It's a lot of responsibility. You've never shied away from responsibility." "I'm 60 years old, Lydia. Maybe it's time for younger people to take the lead." "You're 60 and wiser than most 30-year-olds. The state needs your experience." He accepted, of course. The ceremony was held in Helena, with all their children and grandchildren in attendance. Sarah came from Chicago with David and their 3 children. James brought Alice and their 2 boys. Maggie arrived from medical school with news of her own engagement to a fellow doctor who supported her ambitions. "Look what you started," Margaret, Lydia's aunt, now in her 80s, said to Lydia at the reception. She'd made the journey from Philadelphia one last time. One knock on a door in a blizzard, and now this. "We couldn't have known," Lydia said. "Couldn't you?" "Some part of you must have known, when you fought through that storm, that you were fighting towards something momentous. I was just trying not to die. And in not dying, you lived magnificently." The years that followed brought more change, more challenges, more joy. Sarah's suffrage work contributed to women gaining the vote. James's ranch became a model for sustainable agriculture. Maggie opened a clinic serving the poor regardless of ability to pay. Thomas, surprising everyone, became a writer, chronicling the transformation of the West with a poet's eye and a historian's accuracy. Ethan served on the state Supreme Court for 10 years, his decisions consistently protecting the vulnerable and promoting justice. His most famous opinion, defending Native American land rights against corporate encroachment, would be studied in law schools for generations. But perhaps their greatest legacy was simpler than all that. It was the way they loved each other, steadily and truly, through every storm. It was the home they built, not once but twice, that stood as a beacon of possibility. It was the children they raised to question, to fight, to love fiercely and without reservation. On their 40th wedding anniversary, the entire valley threw them a celebration. The town hall was packed, generations of families whose lives had been touched by their courage and kindness. "Speech," the crowd called. Ethan stood, Lydia beside him, their children and grandchildren surrounding them. He looked out at the sea of faces, many familiar, some new, all part of the community they'd helped build. 40 years ago, he began, a stranger knocked on my door during a blizzard. I thought I was saving her life. I was wrong. She was saving mine. Together, we've weathered literal and figurative storms. We've faced down tyrants and treasury thieves, raised children in hell in equal measure. The crowd laughed. But here's what I've learned. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's acting despite fear. Love isn't the absence of conflict. It's choosing each other through conflict. And home isn't a place. It's the people who stand with you when standing seems impossible. He raised his glass. To the knockers on doors in blizzards, to the ones who open those doors, to the courage to begin again, no matter how many times we must begin, and to love, the kind that transforms lonely cabins into homes, strangers into family, and settlements into communities. The toast was drunk with enthusiasm, but Ethan only had eyes for Lydia, still beautiful to him at 63, her hair silver now, but her spirit unchanged. "That was beautiful," she said. "You're beautiful." Flatterer. Truth-teller. They danced that night as they had at their wedding, as they had through all the years between, sometimes stepping on each other's toes, sometimes in perfect harmony, but always together. Later, much later, when the guests had gone and they sat on their porch watching the sunrise paint the mountains gold, Lydia said, "If you could go back, change anything, would you?" "Not a thing. Not even the painful parts? Especially not those. They led us here. Here is good. Here is perfect." Thomas, now 17 and full of questions, joined them on the porch. "Tell me again about the blizzard," he said, as he had so many times throughout his childhood. So they told him, as they had told all their children, about the storm that brought them together, the courage that kept them together, and the love that made everything else possible. "It sounds like a fairy tale," Thomas said. "All true stories do, from far enough away," Ethan replied. "But living them is messier, harder, more complicated than any fairy tale." "And more rewarding," Lydia added. "Fairy tales end with happily ever after. Real life continues with all its complexities and surprises, like you having me at 43. Exactly like that. The best surprises come when you think your story is already written." As the sun climbed higher, warming the valley that had become their kingdom, Ethan thought about the journey from that desperate night to this golden morning. Every loss had led to a gain. Every ending had become a beginning. Every knock on the door had been an opportunity to choose courage over fear. "What are you thinking?" Lydia asked, knowing his contemplative moods after all these years. "That we should write it down. All of it. So future generations know." "Know what?" "That love isn't just the stuff of stories. That ordinary people can do extraordinary things. That sometimes the worst blizzard brings the greatest blessing." "Thomas could write it," Lydia suggested. "He has the gift." Thomas straightened. "I would be honored to tell your story." "Our story," Ethan corrected. "The valley's story. It belongs to everyone who fought for it, built it, believed in it." And so it was decided. Thomas would chronicle not just the romance that began in a blizzard, but the community that grew from that single act of opening a door to someone in need. Years later, after Ethan and Lydia had passed, him at 82, her at 79, within days of each other, neither willing to live long without the other, Thomas's book would become a classic of Western literature. But more than that, it would become a testament to the power of love to transform lives, communities, and destinies. The house they built still stood, expanded and modernized, but essentially unchanged, sheltering new generations who knew the story of the couple who refused to let fear win. The valley prospered, its charter of mutual protection evolving into a tradition of communal support that survived industrialization, depression, and war. And somewhere, in the place beyond knowing, Ethan and Lydia and Sarah watched over it all, together in whatever comes after, their love story complete but its impact rippling outward like circles from a stone dropped in still water, touching shores they never could have imagined when she knocked on his door that desperate winter night. The ending was a beginning. The beginning never really ended. And in that paradox lay the truth of all great loves. They transcend their own boundaries, becoming legend, becoming inspiration, becoming the light that guides other desperate souls through their own storms to the warm cabins of their destinies. In the museum that the house eventually became, visitors could see the photograph Lydia saved from the fire, Sarah's picture, carefully preserved. Beside it sat another photograph, Ethan and Lydia on their 40th anniversary, surrounded by their children and grandchildren, faces bright with joy and accomplishment. But perhaps the most telling artifact was the simplest, the door. The original door from Ethan's first cabin, salvaged from the fire and mounted on the wall. A small placard beside it read, "Sometimes salvation comes from opening your door to a stranger in need. Sometimes it comes from being brave enough to knock. Either way, it begins with choosing hope over fear." And in that valley, where the railroad still runs and the mountains still stand eternal, they remember. They remember the cowboy and the abandoned bride. They remember the courage and the love. They remember that sometimes the greatest adventures begin with the smallest acts of kindness. They remember, and they hope, and they keep their doors unlocked on stormy nights, just in case destiny comes knocking.